Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It's weird typing this out. My hands are still a little shaky even now, weeks later. I don't really know why I'm doing this, except that I can't stop thinking about it, and maybe writing it down will help get it out of my head. I've always loved the woods, the quiet, the smell of pine, the way the light comes through the leaves. It's my church, you know. But something happened on a trip last month that, I don't know, it broke that feeling for me. I still go out, but it's different now. I'm always listening, always watching the trees. I'd heard about this spot from a buddy of mine. He said it was way out there, real remote, no cell service, the whole deal. Sounded perfect. I needed a reset. Work had been a grind, just one of those periods where everything feels loud and crowded. So I decided on a solo overnight. Just me, my tent, and a whole lot of quiet. I got up before the sun that morning, loaded my truck in the dark. The drive was nice, just me and my coffee, watching the sky go from black to grey to a soft, hazy blue. I reached the trailhead around 7 in the morning. The parking area was just a dirt pull-off with a wooden sign so faded you could barely read it. Mine was the only vehicle. I remember feeling a little thrill about that. Total solitude. The hike in was 4 miles, all uphill. It was tough, my pack felt heavy, and I was sweating through my shirt within the first 20 minutes. But it was a good kind of pain. The forest was thick, old growth with ferns covering the ground, and that deep, earthy smell everywhere. I remember the sound of my own breathing and my boots crunching on the trail. That was it. No cars, no people, nothing. I finally reached the clearing around 10 in the morning. It was exactly as my friend had described. A flat, grassy spot right next to a small, fast-moving stream. The water was so clear, you could see every stone on the bottom. It was perfect. I dropped my pack with a grunt and just stood there for a minute, listening to the water and the birds. I felt like I could finally breathe. Setting up the tent took no time. I'd done it 100 times before. I gathered some firewood, stacking it neatly for later, and then I just sat on a log by the stream and ate an apple. The silence was heavy, but in a good way. It felt like the forest was holding its breath with me. After a simple lunch, a sandwich I'd packed, I got a little restless. It was only early afternoon, and the thought of just sitting around until dark didn't appeal to me. I decided to explore a bit, follow a game trail I'd spotted that led deeper into the woods, away from the stream. I figured I'd walk for an hour or so and then turn back. The trail was narrow and faint, more of a suggestion than a path. The light got dimmer the further I went, the canopy overhead so thick it felt like twilight. That's when I started to see things that made me pause. Not scary things, just odd. The first thing was a tree. A young pine, maybe as thick as my thigh, snapped in half about 5 feet off the ground. It wasn't splintered like it had fallen. It was clean, like something had just grabbed it and snapped it over its knee. The top part was lying a good 10 feet away. I remember thinking, whoa, a bear must be strong. I'd seen bears break branches before, but never anything that clean. I shrugged it off. Bear activity. That's what you tell yourself out there. It's always a bear. A little further on, I saw another one, same thing. A tree just snapped in two, and then I saw a third. This one was bigger. The hair on my arms started to stand up a little. It wasn't a scared feeling yet, more like a deep curiosity, mixed with a low-grade hum of unease. Why would a bear do that? To mark its territory? I didn't know. I kept walking, but I was more alert now, my eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. I found a bush with some big, dark hairs caught on a thorny branch. They were coarse, almost like a horse's mane, but thicker. I didn't touch them. I just looked. My mind was still stubbornly sticking to the bear explanation, but it was getting harder. The air felt different. The birds had stopped singing. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, nothing. That's a cliché, I know, but it's true. It's a real thing that happens. When the woods go quiet, something is wrong. That's when I decided I'd had enough exploring. The fun was gone, replaced by a creeping dread I couldn't explain. I turned around and started heading back to camp, walking a little faster than I had on the way out. My heart was beating a little too hard in my chest. I told myself I was being stupid, letting my imagination run wild in the silence. It took me about 45 minutes to get back to the clearing. The first thing I saw was the color of my tent. Or rather, I didn't see it. Where my blue dome tent should have been, there was just a wreck. I stopped dead at the edge of the clearing. My brain couldn't process it at first. It was like looking at a photograph of my campsite that someone had torn to pieces. My tent wasn't just collapsed, it was shredded. Long, violent tears ran through the nylon fabric, and the aluminum poles were bent into pretzel shapes. It looked like something had taken a giant can opener to it. My sleeping bag was pulled out and thrown into the stream, where it was slowly getting soaked. My cooler was lying on its side, the lid ripped clean off. The food I'd packed for dinner, hot dogs, a package of buns, some fruit, was scattered everywhere. It wasn't eaten. It was just destroyed. The buns were smashed into the dirt. The hot dogs were torn open, their contents squeezed out. The fruit was stomped into pulp. It was wasteful, vicious. My folding camping chair was a twisted mess of metal and canvas. It wasn't just knocked over, it was bent in half, the legs splayed out at impossible angles. I stood there, frozen, my mouth hanging open. My first thought wasn't even fear, it was a hot, sharp anger. What the hell? Who would do this? Some asshole must have followed me in, but that made no sense. I was 4 miles from the road, and why? Why destroy everything? It was so pointless. I took a few steps into the camp, my boots crunching on my own scattered food. That's when I saw the footprints. They were in a patch of soft, muddy earth near the stream, right where I'd filled my water bottle that morning. They were huge, I mean impossibly huge. I wear a size 10 boot, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was easily twice as long and twice as wide. The print was deep, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. It had a clear arch and 5 toes, but the shape was all wrong for a bear. It was more like a giant human foot, but wider, splayed out. My blood went cold. The anger evaporated, replaced by a terror so pure and sharp it felt like a physical thing, a knife in my gut. This wasn't a person. This wasn't a bear. I slowly straightened up, my eyes darting around the clearing. The silence was absolute. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. My skin was crawling, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like they were made of wood. And then I saw it. About 50 yards away at the tree line on the other side of the stream, there was a figure. It was half hidden behind the thick trunk of a cedar tree, but I could see enough. It was tall, so damn tall, 7, maybe 8 feet. And it was covered in hair, not fur, but long, shaggy, dark, brownish-red hair. It was just standing there, perfectly still. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was in shadow, but I could feel it looking at me. I could feel its eyes on me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an intense, focused stare. It was watching me. My heart just exploded in my chest. It was beating so fast and so hard I thought it was going to break my ribs. My breath caught in my throat. I've never been so scared in my entire life. This wasn't an animal curious about food. This was something else. There was an intelligence in that stare, a knowing. It knew I was there. It had been waiting for me to come back. I couldn't move for a second. I was locked in place, just staring back at this thing. My mind was racing, a jumble of half-formed thoughts. Bigfoot, oh my God, it's real, and it's right there. But the word Bigfoot felt silly, cartoonish. This thing wasn't cartoonish. It was solid and powerful and real. The sheer mass of it was terrifying. The intelligence in its posture was terrifying. My survival instinct finally kicked in. Don't run. Don't make any sudden moves. I'd read that somewhere about predators. I didn't know if it applied here, but it was the only plan I had. I started backing up, one slow, careful step at a time, never taking my eyes off the figure behind the tree. My pack was where I'd left it, near the wreck of my tent. I had to get to it. My keys were in the top pocket, my truck keys. Every step felt like it took an hour. The distance to my pack felt like a mile. I was hyper-aware of everything. The feel of the ground under my boots, the way my jeans rubbed against my legs, the cold sweat on my back. I could smell the pine and the dirt and my own fear. I reached my pack. I didn't dare look down. I kept my eyes glued to that tree line. I knelt down, my movements stiff and slow, and fumbled with the zipper on the top pocket. My fingers were numb, clumsy. I felt inside, my heart leaping when my fingers closed around the cold metal of my key fob. I stood back up, keys clutched in my hand so tight the teeth were digging into my palm. I started backing away again, toward the trail that led out. I was moving away from my camp, from all my destroyed gear. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the distance between me and that thing. I kept waiting for it to move, to step out from behind the tree, to charge. My mind was painting vivid, horrifying pictures of what would happen if it did. The strength it would have to snap those trees, to tear my tent apart. It would be nothing for it to do the same to me. I reached the trailhead of the clearing and forced myself to turn around. I started walking, a fast, purposeful walk, not a run. I could feel its eyes on my back. It was the most intense sensation I've ever felt, like a physical pressure between my shoulder blades. I had to fight the urge to look back every 2 seconds. I told myself, just get to the bend in the trail. Once you're around the bend, you're out of its line of sight. I counted my steps. 1, 2, 3. The trees closed in around me. I could still feel it watching. I reached the bend, a sharp turn where the trail dipped down. I risked one last glance over my shoulder. It was still there. It had taken a single step out from behind the tree. It was just standing at the edge of the clearing now, in plain view, watching me leave. It didn't make a sound. It didn't gesture. It just stood there, a massive, dark silhouette against the green of the forest, and watched. That image is burned into my brain, the sheer size of it, the stillness. I turned the corner and broke into a run. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I didn't care about sudden movements. I ran like I've never run before in my life. My pack bounced and slammed against my back. My lungs burned. Branches whipped at my face and arms. I didn't feel any of it. All I felt was the raw animal need to get away. I ran for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 minutes before I had to stop, doubled over, gasping for air. I listened. The forest was still dead silent. I couldn't hear anything following me, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. I started walking again, a fast, panicked walk, glancing behind me constantly, the 2-mile mark. That's when I finally started to feel a little bit safe. The terror was still there, a cold stone in my stomach, but the edge had come off. I was getting closer to the truck. The last half-mile I ran again. I didn't stop until I burst out of the trees and saw my truck sitting alone in the dirt pull-off. The sight of it, that familiar dirty blue paint, almost made me cry with relief. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the door lock. I threw my pack into the passenger seat, jumped in, and locked the doors. The sound of the locks clicking into place was the best sound I'd ever heard. I started the engine and just sat there for a minute, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my entire body trembling. I looked at the trailhead. A dark opening in the wall of trees. I half expected to see it step out onto the road, but nothing happened. I put the truck in drive and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop until I was on the main highway surrounded by other cars. I still go camping. Like I said, it's in my blood, but I don't go alone anymore, and I don't go deep. I stick to busy campgrounds where I can hear other people. The woods don't feel peaceful to me now. They feel like they're holding a secret, a big, powerful, intelligent secret that watched me, that destroyed my camp not for food, but for a reason I'll never understand. I don't know what it was. I just know what I saw, and I know that for a few long minutes, it saw me too, and we both knew it. Story 2. It was August of 2008. I remember the exact date because it was my dad's birthday, the 18th, and I'd just left their place after a quick dinner. I was driving home on this back road, the one that cuts through the woods between my parents' town and mine. It's a narrow, winding strip of asphalt, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, and it's hemmed in on both sides by a wall of pine and fir trees so thick you can't see 10 feet into them, even in broad daylight. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, maybe 20 minutes prior. That time of evening where the world isn't dark yet, but it's getting there fast. The sky was this deep, bruised purple, and the shadows were stretching long and pooling in the ditches. I had my truck window rolled down, just a crack, enough to let in the cool evening air and the smell of damp earth and pine needles. The radio was off. I was just driving, lost in my own thoughts, the hum of the tires on the road the only real sound, and then I heard it. It was faint at first, so faint I thought it was a trick of the wind, or maybe a distant semi straining up a hill on the highway miles away. But it wasn't. It was a sound I hadn't heard in over a decade, not since I was a stupid kid messing around in these same woods, but a sound you don't ever really forget, a low, moaning growl. It was like nothing else, not a bear, not a cougar, not a dying animal. It was deeper than that, with a weird, almost human resonance to the moan part of it, but the growl underneath was pure, raw animal. My foot just came off the gas. I didn't even think about it. The truck coasted for a second, and then I hit the brake, pulling over onto the narrow gravel shoulder. The tires crunched on the loose stone. My heart was already starting to thump a little harder in my chest, a dull, heavy beat I could feel in my ears. I turned the key, killing the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute and heavy. For a second, there was nothing, just the faint ringing in my own ears and the sound of my own breathing. I held my breath. Then it came again, louder this time, much louder. It wasn't distant anymore. It was coming from the hill behind me, to the east. The side my driver's window was facing. The sound seemed to roll down the slope, amplifying as it came. That same moan, drawn out and mournful, but now the growl was more pronounced, a rumbling, guttural vibration that I could feel in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just a sound you heard, it was a sound you felt physically, a pressure in the air. I leaned my head out the open window, straining to listen, trying to pinpoint it. The problem was the echo. This part of the country is all hills and valleys, and sound does weird things. It would seem to come from one spot, then bounce off a rock face or a dense patch of trees, and seem to come from another direction entirely. It was close, though. I knew that much. It felt close enough that whatever was making it could probably see my truck, see me sitting there in the cab. The growl deepened, turning into something that sounded almost like a challenge. It wasn't a roar, not like a lion. It was lower, more sustained, a powerful exhalation of pure menace. I could hear the sheer size in that sound. Nothing small makes a noise like that, nothing that walks on 4 legs. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel a cold sweat starting to prickle on my back, under my t-shirt, even though the evening air coming through the window was cool. I remember stupid, specific details. A mosquito buzzed near my ear, and I didn't even bother to swat it away. I could smell my own deodorant, a sharp, clinical scent that suddenly seemed very out of place in the middle of all that raw, organic fear. The plastic of the steering wheel felt slick under my palms. The dashboard clock glowed a faint green, but I didn't register the time. It was just a green smudge in the growing darkness. The sound stopped, not faded away. Stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was worse. It was a thick, waiting silence. It felt heavy, oppressive. The woods had gone completely quiet. No crickets, no frogs from the creek I knew was down in the ravine, no rustle of leaves, nothing. It was as if every other living thing in the forest had frozen or run, or was holding its breath just like I was. I sat there, not moving a muscle. I was afraid to even breathe too loud. My eyes were scanning the tree line, but it was useless. The light was fading fast now, the deep purple of the sky turning to a velvety black, and the wall of trees was just a solid mass of impenetrable shadow. I couldn't see more than a few feet into it. Anything could be standing 10 feet away, watching me, and I'd never know. I kept expecting to hear something else. The crunch of a heavy footstep on the forest floor, the snap of a branch. Anything to give me a clue, to tell me it was moving away, but there was nothing, just that absolute, unnerving silence. My mind was racing, trying to process it, trying to fit it into a box I could understand. A bear? No, I've heard bears. They huff, they woof, they make chuffing sounds. They don't make a moaning, guttural growl that echoes through a valley and vibrates in your chest. A moose? Wrong season, wrong terrain. A person playing a prank. Out here, on this road, at this time of night, it was absurd. And the sheer volume of it, the power behind it, ruled out any human I could think of. That's when the memory from years earlier slammed into me with full force. I must have been 14, 15 years old. Me and a couple of friends were camping out in these same woods, not far from this very road. We'd built a small fire. We were being idiots, throwing pine cones at each other. And we heard it, the exact same sound. A moaning growl from the darkness, just beyond the circle of our firelight. It was far away that time, but it scared us so bad, we poured water on the fire, packed our stuff in a blind panic, and ran all the way back to my friend's house, 2 miles through the dark. We never talked about it again. We just pretended it never happened, wrote it off as a bear or our imaginations. Sitting in my truck, all those years later, that childhood fear came back. But it was an adult fear now. It was colder, sharper. It wasn't the fear of a spooky story. It was the fear of a real, physical, and utterly unknown thing that was somewhere out there in the dark, and it knew I was here. The terror wasn't a sudden jolt anymore. It was a deep, cold unease that had settled into my bones. It was the feeling of being studied, hunted maybe. I felt incredibly small and exposed inside the cab of my truck. The metal and glass felt as flimsy as tissue paper. I had this irrational thought that if I turned the key, the noise of the engine starting would be like a dinner bell. I don't know how long I sat there. It felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few minutes. Time gets weird when you're that scared. Every second stretches out. I kept my eyes glued to the tree line, my head cocked, listening so hard my ears ached. I was waiting for a shape to emerge from the shadows, a big dark shape, walking on 2 legs. My right hand was still on the key in the ignition. My left was gripping the door handle, my thumb resting on the button for the window. I had this frantic internal debate. Roll the window up. It would block some of the sound, make me feel a tiny bit safer, but it would also be a noise. Leave it down so I could hear if it was moving. I left it down. I decided information, even terrifying information, was better than being blind and deaf in a metal box. The woods were still dead silent. No wind, nothing. I finally couldn't take it anymore. The waiting was worse than the sound had been. The not knowing. I had to get out of there. My movements were slow, deliberate as I turned the key. The engine cranked and the sound was explosively loud in the silence. I flinched, expecting some kind of reaction from the woods, a returned roar, a charge, something. Nothing happened. I shoved the truck into drive, my hand shaking so badly I almost knocked it into reverse. I didn't bother with my seatbelt. I just hit the gas, pulling back onto the road too fast, the tires spinning in the gravel before catching the asphalt. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see standing in the road behind me, or worse, loping out of the trees after me. I drove. I drove faster than I should have on that winding road, my high beams cutting 2 tunnels of light through the absolute blackness. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I kept checking the rearview mirror now, my eyes flicking up every 2 seconds, expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or a massive dark form keeping pace with the truck. But there was only empty black road behind me. The 5-mile drive home felt like it took a lifetime. Every shadow at the edge of my headlights looked like a crouching figure. Every overhanging branch looked like an arm reaching down. I was breathing in short, sharp gasps. I could smell my own fear, a sour, metallic smell. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, under the weak yellow glow of the motion sensor light, I didn't get out right away. I sat there for a long time, engine off, just listening to the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. I looked at my house, at the warm, safe-looking windows. It felt like I had arrived from another world. I finally went inside, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, my legs feeling like jelly. My wife asked me if I was okay, said I looked pale. I just told her I was tired from the drive. I didn't tell her what happened. I knew how it would sound, even to me. Sitting in my own living room, it was starting to sound crazy, but it wasn't crazy. I heard it. I felt it, that sound, that moaning growl from the hill. It wasn't just a noise, it was a presence. It was heavy and old, and it knew the woods in a way I never would. It reinforced everything I'd ever half believed about this area, all the local stories and whispered rumors about things that live deep in the mountains, things that don't want to be found. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? The police? They'd laugh. The Fish and Wildlife Department? They'd say it was a bear. I knew it wasn't a bear. To this day, more than a decade later, I don't take that road after sunset. I'll drive an extra 20 minutes on the highway to avoid it. And sometimes, on a quiet, still night, if I'm outside at my own place and the wind is just right, I'll find myself stopping whatever I'm doing, holding my breath, and listening. Just listening. Waiting to hear if that sound ever finds its way to me again. I never have, but I know it's still out there. Story 3. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I need to get it out there. I'm a mechanic, 31 years old, and I moved to Central Ohio near Columbus about 9 months ago for work. My family's back home, wife and 2 little ones, and I took this job because it paid better, even if it meant uprooting us. The commute's not bad, just flat, straight roads with not much to look at, especially in the dead of winter. But what happened one morning on my way to work, I still can't shake it. It was a Tuesday, I think, but honestly, the day doesn't matter as much as the fact that it was cold as hell and pitch black out. I leave the house at 4:30 in the morning, so it's always dark, but this particular day felt heavier, like the air was thicker or something. I was driving my old pickup, the one I've had for years, and the heater was just starting to kick in. My hands were cold on the steering wheel, and I could see my breath fogging up the inside of the windshield a little. The road I take is State Route something or other. It's mostly 2 lanes, with fields on either side, and every now and then there's a cluster of trees or a farmhouse set way back. That morning, everything was quiet. No other cars, just me and the hum of the engine. I had the radio on low, some talk station, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was on the day ahead, what jobs I had lined up at the shop, whether I'd remembered to pack my lunch. Normal stuff, you know? Then I saw something up ahead on the right side of the road. At first I thought it was a person. My brain registered it as someone standing there, maybe in one of those big fur coats or something, because it was bulky and dark. But it was way too early for anyone to be out walking, and there's no sidewalks there. I slowed down a bit, thinking maybe it was someone in trouble, like maybe their car broke down, or worse, they were suicidal. I've heard stories about people wandering onto roads in the middle of the night, and my dad always taught me to help if I could. So I eased off the gas, and my truck rolled closer. As I got within maybe 100 feet, I started to feel this weird prickle on the back of my neck. The shape was too big to be a person. I mean, it was massive, taller than any man I've ever seen, and broad-shouldered like a football player ×2. It was just standing there, facing the road, and I could see it was covered in dark, matted hair or fur. Not like a bear, though, more like something in between. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The radio was still on, but I couldn't hear it over the blood rushing in my ears. I was maybe 50 feet away now, and I could see its eyes. They weren't reflective like an animal's, more like they were just dark pits, but they had this intensity to them. It felt like it was staring right at me, right through the windshield, and I got this chill that went down my spine. I've never felt so exposed, like it was seeing everything I was thinking. I slowed down even more, almost to a crawl, and that's when I noticed what was in its right hand. It was holding something round and dark, and for a second I thought it was a rock or a log, but then my headlights caught it just right, and I saw it was the head of a deer, a full-grown deer's head, severed at the neck, and it was just dangling there by the hair or whatever. The body was lying a few feet away on the shoulder of the road, and it was ripped open. I mean, the abdomen was torn apart. Guts spilled out all over the ground, and there was a pool of blood around it that looked black in the dim light. The smell hit me then. Even through the closed windows, I could catch a whiff of something metallic and rotten, like old meat and copper. My stomach turned, and I felt like I was going to puke. The creature didn't move much, just stood there holding that deer head like it was nothing. Then it made this motion, like it was lifting its arm to throw it. Not at me, necessarily, but in the direction of my truck. I don't know if it was a threat or what, but in that moment, pure fear took over. I slammed on the gas, but my hands were shaking so bad that I swerved into the opposite lane. The tires skidded on the pavement, and I felt the back end of the truck fishtail. For a second, I thought I was going to spin out or hit the ditch. I could hear the gravel crunching under the wheels as I veered onto the shoulder, and my headlights swept across the creature again. It was still standing there, watching me, and I swear it had this, I don't know, almost curious look, like it was studying me. I managed to straighten out and floored it. The engine roared, and I didn't look back. I just kept driving, my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat soaking through my shirt even though it was freezing outside. I kept checking the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind me, just darkness. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like hours. My hands were trembling so much I had to pull over a mile or so down the road just to catch my breath. I sat there for a few minutes, shaking, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a bear? No, bears don't stand like that, and they don't hold things in their hands like that. And the size, it was way bigger than any bear I've ever seen in pictures. I drove the rest of the way to work, in a daze. The sun started to come up, but it didn't make me feel any better. When I got to the shop, my boss asked if I was okay. I must have looked pale or something. I just mumbled that I didn't sleep well and got to work, but I couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing staring at me, holding that deer head. The image was burned into my brain. I kept thinking about my family. What if they'd been in the car with me? What if it had come closer? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how helpless I felt. I'm a big guy, used to handling heavy tools and machinery, but in that moment, I was nothing. The day dragged on, and all I could think about was driving back home and checking that spot. Part of me didn't want to, but I had to know if it was still there, or if I'd imagined the whole thing. By the time my shift ended, it was late afternoon, and the sun was already setting. The drive home was tense. I took the same route, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. As I approached the area where I'd seen it, I slowed down, my heart in my throat. The road was empty, just like usual. But when I got to the exact spot, I saw it. A dark stain on the asphalt where the deer's body had been. It was a big, rusty-looking patch like dried blood, and there were a few bits of fur or something scattered around, but no carcass, no creature, nothing. I pulled over for a minute, just staring at that stain. The air felt cold and still, and I could hear the wind whistling through the fields. No sounds of animals, no cars, just silence. I got out of the truck and walked over to the edge of the road. The ground was muddy from recent rain, and I could see where something heavy had been dragged away, tracks leading off into the trees, but they weren't footprints I recognized. More like deep, uneven impressions, too big for a person. I didn't go any closer. I just stood there, feeling this deep, primal fear settle in my gut. Whatever it was gone, but it had been real. I drove home the rest of the way in silence. No radio, just me and my thoughts. When I got there, my wife asked how my day was, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her. What would I say? That I saw some monster on the side of the road? She'd think I was losing it, so I just said it was fine and hugged the kids a little tighter that night. That was a few weeks ago, and I still think about it every time I drive that road. I'm always scanning the sides, half expecting to see it again. It's changed how I see things. I used to think all those Bigfoot stories were just nonsense, but now, I don't know. There's something out there, and I saw it. I felt it stare, smelled the blood, and saw the raw power in how it held that deer head. It wasn't some made-up horror movie thing. It was real, and it happened to me. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can still feel those eyes on me, like it's watching from somewhere in the dark. I don't think I'll ever forget it. Story 4. This was back in late June of 2010. I was 16. My family, my mom, my dad, and my younger brother, who was 14, had driven up to June Lake in California. We were staying at this nice place, the Double Eagle Resort and Spa, in one of their standalone cabins. The cabin was great, real cozy, with a big stone fireplace and these huge windows looking out into the woods. But its big selling point, the seclusion, is what made the whole thing so much worse. Our cabin was tucked right up against the tree line, a real back-against-the-wall kind of spot. Behind us, maybe a couple hundred yards out past a scraggly patch of pines, was this wall of granite. It wasn't just a few rocks, it was a proper formation, like a giant grey spine dividing the kinda tamed land around the resort from the wild, endless expanse of the Inyo National Forest. You could feel the difference. On our side of the cabin was the smell of barbecue and pine cleaner. Behind it was just wildness, deep, old and quiet. The first day was normal. We unpacked, messed around, had dinner. It was all good. That night, the 30th, it was clear and cold. The kind of cold that nips at your ears even in summer because of the altitude. My dad, my brother and I decided to go out on the back deck around 11:30. My mom had gone to bed already, said she was tired from the drive. The deck had these big Adirondack chairs, and we just sat there for a while, not talking much. That's the first thing I remember clearly, the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, it was a heavy, waiting kind of silence. You know how sometimes the woods are full of little noises, crickets, the rustle of something small in the leaves, the wind? This was none of that. It was dead, absolutely still. The only sound was the faint, tinny buzz from a security light on the corner of the cabin. We were just sitting there, looking up at the stars, which were insane out there, way brighter than back home. I remember feeling the rough, cold wood of the chair arm under my palm, and I remember shivering a little, pulling my hoodie tighter. Then it happened. It wasn't a gradual thing. There was no warning rustle, no crack of a branch. 1 second, it was that profound, almost oppressive silence. The next, the night just tore open. A howl ripped out from the granite formations behind us. I've spent years trying to find a word for it, and I can't. It wasn't a coyote. I've heard coyotes. They're yippy and high-pitched, a chaotic chorus. This was none of that. This was a single pure note, deep and powerful, like something you'd feel in your chest more than hear with your ears. And it was loud, unnaturally loud. It didn't sound like it was coming from one spot. It felt like the sound was emanating from the rock itself, from the whole forest at once. It had this rise and fall to it, a weird, almost melodic pattern that was nothing like the straight-up wail of a wolf you hear on TV. It was lower than that, thicker, with a guttural weight to it that made the air vibrate. The sound hit me physically. My heart didn't just beat faster. It felt like it seized up in my chest, a hard, painful clench. My breath caught in my throat, and for that first second, I literally couldn't move. I was frozen solid in that chair. My dad, who's a big, calm guy, a former Marine, shot straight up out of his seat. I saw his silhouette go rigid against the starry sky. My brother, next to me, let out this tiny, choked gasp, like the air had been punched out of him. The howl went on, maybe for 45 seconds. It felt like an hour. It was the longest, most terrifying minute of my life. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck was standing straight up. My scalp was crawling. I could feel a cold sweat break out under my hoodie, a sudden nasty dampness. I just stared into the black wall of trees and rock, my eyes straining to see anything at all. But there was nothing, just the impenetrable dark and that sound. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was even heavier than before, now charged with pure fear. It was a listening silence. We were all listening so hard it hurt. My ears were ringing from the sudden absence of that noise. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears, a frantic whooshing sound. My dad was still standing, his head cocked, his whole body tense. My brother had pulled his knees up to his chest on the chair, making himself small. We must have stayed like that for a solid 15 minutes, just waiting. The cold from the chair had seeped through my jeans, but I didn't dare shift my weight. Every tiny sound, the creak of the cabin settling, the distant hum of a car on the main road far away, made us all flinch. But there was nothing else. No follow-up, no movement, no more sound from the direction of the rocks. It was as if the forest had taken a single monstrous breath and was now holding it again. Finally, my dad let out a long, slow breath. "What in God's name was that?" he whispered. He didn't sound scared, not exactly, but there was a tightness in his voice I'd never heard before, a kind of shaken awe. My brother just shook his head, his face pale in the dim light. I couldn't take it anymore. The tension was making me feel sick to my stomach, a real physical nausea. "I'm going inside," I mumbled, my voice sounding weird and thin. I practically fled from the deck, my legs feeling shaky and weak. The warmth of the cabin felt alien and wrong. I went straight to the bathroom to take a shower, mostly just to do something normal, to try and wash the feeling off me. The hot water stung my cold skin, but I still felt dirty, like the sound had left a film on me. I stood under the spray for a long time trying to logic it out. A bear? No, bears don't sound like that. A mountain lion? Their screams are horrifying, but they're shrill, not this deep, resonant bass. My mind kept circling back to one thought. It was too big. The sound was just too big. When I got out, wrapped in a towel with my hair dripping, I walked into the main room and knew immediately that something else had happened. The atmosphere was completely different. My dad and brother were sitting on the big leather couch, but they weren't relaxed. They were sitting bolt upright and their eyes were wide, just huge. They had this shell-shocked look, like people who'd just seen a car crash. My mum was there too, standing by the kitchenette, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked pale. "You okay?" I asked, my heart starting to thump all over again. My dad looked at me and his face was dead serious. "You didn't hear it?" "Hear what? I was in the shower." "It happened again," my brother said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 times. My dad explained. About 20 minutes after I'd gone inside, so maybe around midnight or a little after, the silence had been broken again, not by one long howl, but by three shorter ones. They were the same voice, the same terrifying deep tone, but they were sharper, more deliberate, and they came at exact 20-second intervals. 1, then 20 seconds of that awful listening silence. 2, another 20 seconds. 3. My mom, who had been reading in bed, heard them clear as day from her room at the front of the cabin. She said the windows actually vibrated. It knew we were here, she said, and her voice was trembling. It was counting or signaling, something that wasn't just an animal making noise. That was the moment the real terror set in. The first howl was terrifying because it was unknown. This was worse. This felt intelligent. An animal howls because it's communicating or marking territory, but the random, chaotic timing of an animal cry is part of what makes it an animal. This wasn't random. The precision of the 20-second gaps changed everything. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a pattern. It was a message, and we were the ones it was meant for. We spent the rest of that night with all the lights on. We didn't talk about much else. We tried to rationalize it. My dad got on his laptop, his fingers tapping nervously on the keys, looking up local wildlife. We listened to sound clips of wolves, of elk bugling, of every large mammal in North America. Nothing matched. A wolf's howl is long and mournful, but it's higher, more melodic in a wild way. This was a roar that happened to be shaped like a howl. It was a sound that should have come from something the size of a car. The next day, the 1st of July, we tried to act normal. We went into town, walked around June Lake, but the conversation kept circling back to the night before. We were all jumpy. Every time a dog barked in the distance, we'd all go quiet for a second, listening. The gorgeous scenery, the lake, the mountains. It all felt like a painted backdrop. The real world was back behind our cabin in those woods. That second night, we didn't go out on the deck. We locked the doors early and drew all the blinds. We didn't hear anything. The silence was back, but now it felt like a taunt, like whatever it was had said what it needed to say and was just waiting out there. We left the next morning, cutting our trip short by a day. Nobody argued about it. It's been years. We still talk about it sometimes at family gatherings. It's our family's unsolved mystery. My dad, the skeptic, will still say, "Remember that sound at June Lake?" And we'll all get quiet. We never came up with an answer. It wasn't a bear, a wolf, a coyote, a person playing a prank. The location, the power, the sheer volume, the intelligent spacing of those last three calls. It doesn't fit. The thing that haunts me the most, the detail that keeps me up sometimes, is the feeling I had in that first second of silence after the initial howl ended. It was this crystal clear instinctual knowledge that slammed into my 16-year-old brain. The forest wasn't empty. It wasn't just trees and rock. It was awake. And something in it, something ancient and massive and completely unknown, was now aware of us. It had announced itself, and for 20 precise seconds between each of its last three calls, it was listening back. Story 5. It was one of those sticky South Carolina summer days where the air feels like a wet blanket you can't shake off, the kind of day that makes you lazy and slow. I must have been about 14, which would have put my brother at 12, and our two cousins right around the same age. We were staying at my dad's place for a couple of weeks, a small house that felt like it was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods so thick you couldn't see 10 feet into them. The only real relief from the heat was Lawson's Fork Creek. It wasn't much, just a brown water creek that wound through the bottomland, but it was deep enough in spots to dunk yourself and cold enough to make you gasp. That's where we were headed that afternoon, the four of us, just like we did most days. We'd spent the morning doing nothing, watching cartoons until our brains felt numb. And finally, my brother just said, "Let's go to the creek." and we all shuffled out the door, not even bothering with shoes. The walk down was familiar, a dirt path worn bare by deer and kids like us, cutting through pines and oaks. The ground was a carpet of brown needles and leaves, soft under our bare feet. You could smell the heat baking the pine sap, a sweet, sharp smell that always reminds me of being a kid. We were laughing, shoving each other, just being stupid. I remember the sun coming through the trees in broken pieces, making everything dappled and green. We got to our usual spot, a wide, slow-moving bend in the creek with a big, flat rock we used to jump off of. The water was the color of sweet tea from all the tannins. We didn't waste any time. We just dropped our t-shirts on the bank and waded in. The shock of the cold was instant, a relief that went right to your bones. I was floating on my back, looking up at the sky through the canopy of leaves, just letting the current tug me gently. My brother and cousins were splashing around, their voices echoing off the water. It was so normal, so completely and utterly normal. That's what gets me, even now. How fast it all changed. I was still on my back, my ears mostly underwater, so the world was a muted, gurgling place. I saw my cousin, the older one, stop splashing. He was looking toward the far bank, his body completely still. I righted myself, my feet finding the silty bottom. "What?" I said. He didn't answer, he just pointed. I followed his line of sight across the creek, maybe 30 yards away. At first I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, just the same tangle of trees and undergrowth. Then my eyes focused on it. It was leaning against a massive pine tree. My brain didn't want to process it at first. It was just a shape, a wrong shape. It was tall, so much taller than a man, and it was covered in hair, this long, shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the shadows. It wasn't standing upright. It was sort of slouched against the tree trunk, one long arm braced against the bark, like it was just watching us. The sheer size of it is what hit me first. It made the tree look smaller. Its shoulders were huge, rounded, and powerful. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, just a dark patch where a face should be, but I had this overwhelming feeling that it was looking right at me, right through me. A sound came out of my cousin's mouth, a choked, guttural whisper. "Run." That one word broke the spell. My brother and other cousin, who had been closer to the bank, were already scrambling out of the water, their wet feet slipping on the mud. I didn't think. There was no thought. It was just a raw animal command that flooded my body. "Move!" I lunged for the bank, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break. My feet slipped in the mud, and I fell, my knees and hands sinking into the cold, sticky muck. I didn't care. I was back up in an instant, scrambling on all fours like a dog. I grabbed my shirt without stopping and just started running, following my brother and cousins as they bolted up the path. The path away from the creek wasn't easy. It was a steep, eroded bank, all roots and loose dirt. We were clawing our way up, gasping for air, our bare feet getting torn up by sticks and stones. I remember the feeling of my lungs burning, the taste of dirt and panic in my mouth. And then we heard it. It wasn't a roar, it wasn't a scream, it was a sound I have never heard before or since. The closest thing I can compare it to is a horse, a deep, guttural, huffing sound, but louder, and with a force behind it that felt like it vibrated in my chest. It wasn't just a noise, it was a physical presence. I dared to look back. I wished to God I hadn't. It was coming up the bank. Not running on all fours, not walking like a man. It was moving in this powerful, loping gait, its long arms swinging. It wasn't even using the path, it was just coming straight up the slope. And it was fast, unbelievably fast. But the worst part, the part that still haunts me, was what it was doing to the trees. There were young pine trees, saplings really, growing on that bank. As it moved, it didn't go around them. It just plowed through them. I saw it push one aside with its forearm, not even breaking stride, and the tree, which was probably as thick as my leg, just snapped. It didn't crack and fall over. It snapped like a dry twig, and the sound was a sharp, sickening pop that cut through the huffing noise it was making. That's when the real, pure terror set in. The kind of fear that empties your mind of everything. There's no room for thought, only sensation. The burning in my legs, the stitch in my side, the cold sweat mixing with the creek water on my skin, the sound of my own ragged, sobbing breaths. We reached the top of the bank and spilled out into a flatter part of the woods. We were supposed to turn left, back towards my dad's house. But the thing was still coming. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind us, that huffing sound getting closer. It wasn't just following the path anymore. It was coming right through the woods, a straight line to us. "This way!" My younger cousin screamed, his voice cracking with panic, and he veered off to the right. It was a terrible idea. That way was a thicket, a nightmare tangle of briars and muscadine vines that we usually avoided at all costs. But we didn't have a choice. The sound was right behind us. I could feel the thud of its steps through the ground. We dove into the briars. It was like throwing yourself into a cage of razor wire. Thorns ripped at my arms, my chest, my legs. They caught on my wet shorts and tore the fabric. I felt sharp, stinging lines of pain open up all over my body. We were crawling, stumbling, fighting through this wall of vegetation. The vines wrapped around our ankles, trying to trip us. We were sobbing, all of us, pure, unashamed terror. I remember the smell of crushed green leaves and damp earth, and the metallic taste of blood in my mouth where I'd bitten my cheek. We just pushed forward, driven by the single, desperate need to get away from that sound. We didn't look back. We couldn't. We were completely focused on the next foot of ground, on pulling ourselves free from the thorns that held us. I don't know how long we were in there. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a minute or two. We burst out the other side, stumbling into a small clearing. We fell to the ground, heaving, our bodies crisscrossed with bleeding scratches. We were a mess, covered in mud, leaves, and blood. We lay there for a second, just trying to breathe, and we listened. The woods had gone quiet. The huffing had stopped. The crashing was gone. There was nothing, just the normal sounds of a summer afternoon, the buzz of insects, the call of a bird in the distance. We didn't move. We just listened, straining our ears for any sign of it. Nothing. Slowly, carefully, we got to our feet. We were shaking so badly we could barely stand. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with a shared horror that words couldn't capture. Without speaking, we started walking as quietly as we could, in a wide circle back towards my dad's house. We didn't run. We were too scared to make a noise. Every snap of a twig underfoot made us jump. Every rustle in the leaves sent a fresh jolt of fear through us. We got back to the house, and we didn't say a word to my dad. What would we have said? We looked like we'd been in a fight with a wildcat. We just went straight to the bathroom and started cleaning ourselves up, wincing as the soap hit the dozens of shallow cuts. We avoided each other's eyes in the mirror. It wasn't until a few days later that we heard something from a neighbor. An old farmer who owned some of the land down near the creek had found 2 of his calves dead. Not just dead, they were torn up. He said it wasn't coyotes or dogs. They were big animals, and whatever got them had just ripped them apart. He said there were strange tracks too, but it had rained and they were too messed up to make out. We never talked about it much after that. What was there to say? We knew what we saw. We knew what chased us. We knew what could push pine trees over like they were nothing. We knew what could make a sound that got inside your bones. The fear from that day never really left me. It's been years, but I still don't like being in the woods alone. I get tense when I hear a branch break. I can't watch those silly Bigfoot shows on TV because they make a joke out of something that, for me, is the most real and terrifying thing that ever happened. It was just there, leaning against that tree. And then it was coming for us. And the woods haven't felt the same since. They feel occupied, like we were in someone else's place that day, and we were told in no uncertain terms to get out. And that sound. I still hear it sometimes, in my dreams, that low, huffing, horse-like sound and the crack of those pine trees. I'll be sitting on my porch now, a grown man, and a gust of wind will rustle the trees in just the wrong way, and for a split second my heart will stop. My breath will catch, and I'm 14 years old again, covered in mud and scratches, running for my life from something I still can't explain. Story 6. Okay, so this is something I've never really talked about with anyone except a couple of close friends, and even then, I downplayed it because who's going to believe me, right? But it's been eating at me for years, and I figure if I'm ever going to get it off my chest, this is the place. I'm just going to write it all out like it happened because, honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. This was back in November of 2002 in Oklahoma. I remember the date because it was the day before my birthday, and I had this dental appointment scheduled, just a routine checkup, nothing major. But what happened that afternoon? Well, it stuck with me in a way that makes my skin crawl even now. That morning, I woke up feeling kind of blah. You know how it is, grey skies, a bit of a chill in the air, and that dampness that seems to seep into everything in late fall. I lived in a small town at the time, not far from Tulsa, and the dental office was on the outskirts, kind of isolated. It was one of those old buildings that used to be a house itself, converted into a clinic, with a big parking lot and not much else around. Across the street, there was this abandoned house that everyone in town knew about. It had been empty for years, windows boarded up, paint peeling, and the yard was overgrown with weeds and brush. People said it was haunted or whatever, but I never paid much attention to that stuff. I was more practical, or so I thought. I drove to the appointment around 1 in the afternoon. The sky was overcast, not quite raining, but that heavy, gloomy feeling like it might any minute. I remember pulling into the parking lot and noticing how quiet it was. No birds, no traffic, just this eerie stillness. I parked my car and sat there for a minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. My hands were a little sweaty because I've never liked dentists. Nothing serious, just that usual anxiety. I took a deep breath and headed inside. The waiting room was small, with those outdated magazines and that sterile smell of antiseptic. I checked in with the receptionist, a woman I'd seen before but didn't know well, and she told me it'd be a few minutes. So I sat down in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs near the window. The window faced the street and that abandoned house across the way. I found myself staring out there, just killing time, noticing how the wind rustled the tall grass around the property. The house itself was dark and looming, with shadows pooling around it because of the clouds. It gave me a weird vibe, but I shrugged it off. Probably just my nerves from being at the dentist. After about 10 minutes, I got up to stretch my legs and wandered closer to the window. I was fidgeting, scrolling through my phone, which was one of those old flip phones back then, but not really paying attention. That's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a dog or maybe a deer. We get those around here sometimes. But then I looked properly and my heart just dropped. Literally felt like it stopped for a second. There, beside the abandoned house, was this thing. It was tall, way taller than any person I'd ever seen. I'd say it was at least 7 feet tall, maybe more, because it towered over the brush around it. Its body was dark brown, almost black, like wet earth or something, and it had this thick, muscular build that made it look solid and heavy. The neck was thick like a tree trunk, and its shoulders were wide, broader than any football player I'd seen. But what got me was the head. It had a wide skull, not human-like at all, more like a gorilla's but flatter, and it was covered in this matted dark hair that seemed to blend into the shadows. It was walking upright, but with a stoop, like it was hunched over slightly, and its arms swung in this deliberate, heavy way. Each step seemed purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going. But there was something primal about it. The way it moved reminded me of those nature documentaries about apes. But this was right here, in broad daylight, in Oklahoma. My first thought was, no way, this can't be real. I blinked a couple of times, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me because of the stress or the weird lighting. But it was still there, moving slowly along the side of the house. I felt this cold sweat break out all over my body. My hands started shaking, and I had to grip the windowsill to steady myself. The air felt thick, like I couldn't breathe properly, and my mouth went dry. I remember my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a person in a costume? But no, the size was all wrong, and the way it moved. It wasn't clumsy or awkward like someone pretending. It was fluid and powerful, like it belonged there. The hair on its body looked real, shaggy and dense, and I could see the muscles bunching under the skin as it walked. It must have been only about 50 yards away from me, across the street, but it felt much closer because of how massive it was. I could see details I wish I hadn't, like how its arms were longer than a human's, hanging down almost to its knees, and how its feet left impressions in the damp ground. There was no sound, though. That's what messed with me the most. It should have made noise, crunching leaves, snapping twigs, but it was silent, like it was gliding. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, so loud I was afraid someone in the office would hear it. I stood there frozen, unable to look away. Part of me wanted to run, to yell for someone, but my legs felt like jelly. I was terrified that if I moved, it would notice me. Its head was turned away so I couldn't see its face, but I got the impression it was scanning the area, the deliberate arm swing. Each movement was slow and controlled, like it was conserving energy or something. It didn't seem hurried or scared. It was just there, existing. And that made it even more frightening, because it felt so out of place, so wrong for this quiet suburban street. Time seemed to slow down. I don't know how long I watched it, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt like an eternity. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but I was paralyzed. I thought about grabbing my phone to take a picture, but my hands were shaking too badly, and I was scared the movement would draw attention. Plus, back then, phone cameras were crap. It would have just been a blur. So I just stood there, taking it all in, memorizing every detail like my life depended on it. Then, it reached the edge of the brush near the house. The brush was thick, a tangle of weeds and small trees that had taken over the yard. It paused for a moment, and I swear it tilted its head slightly, as if listening. That's when I felt this primal fear kick in, like something deep in my gut was telling me to hide, to get away. I held my breath, waiting for it to turn around to look my way. But it didn't. Instead, it took one more step and just disappeared into the brush. Not like it ducked or ran, but it melted into the shadows, like it was part of the environment. 1 second it was there, solid and real, and the next, it was gone, vanished. I kept staring, my eyes glued to the spot where it had been, expecting it to reappear. But nothing happened. The brush swayed a little in the wind, but that was it. The street was empty again, just the abandoned house sitting there, silent and creepy. I stood there for what felt like another 5 minutes, my heart still racing, my body trembling. I could feel the cold from the window seeping into my skin, and I realized I was gripping the sill so hard my knuckles were white. Finally, I managed to step back, my legs wobbly. I looked around the waiting room. The receptionist was typing away, oblivious, and another patient was flipping through a magazine. No one had seen anything. No one had a clue. I felt like I was going to be sick. I stumbled to the chair and sat down, trying to act normal, but my mind was reeling. What the hell had I just seen? Bigfoot? Sasquatch? I'd heard stories, of course, but I always dismissed them as hoaxes or misidentifications. But this was different. It was too real, too vivid. The dental hygienist called my name then, and I jumped like I'd been shocked. I forced myself to stand up and follow her into the exam room, but I was on autopilot. My hands were still shaking. and I kept glancing back at the window, half expecting to see it again. The hygienist asked if I was okay, and I mumbled something about feeling a bit lightheaded, which was true, but I didn't mention what I'd seen. How could I? She'd think I was crazy. The whole time during the appointment, I couldn't focus. The dentist was poking around in my mouth, but all I could think about was that thing. The wide shoulders, the thick neck, the way it moved. It was burned into my brain. I kept replaying it over and over, trying to find some logical explanation. Maybe it was a bear. But bears don't walk upright like that, not for that long. And they're not that tall. A person in a suit? No way. The proportions were all wrong, and it was too fluid. This was something else, something ancient and wild. After the appointment, which felt like it lasted forever, I hurried out of the office. I didn't even stop to schedule a follow-up. I just wanted to get to my car. The sky was still grey, and a light drizzle had started, making everything feel even more oppressive. I scanned the area as I walked across the parking lot, my eyes darting toward the abandoned house and the brush. Nothing. Just the same quiet, eerie landscape. I got into my car and locked the doors immediately, my hands fumbling with the keys. I sat there for a minute, catching my breath, and then I drove off, maybe a little faster than I should have. On the way home, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me or something. But the roads were empty, and the world seemed normal again, cars passing, people going about their day. It was like I'd stepped into some alternate reality for those few minutes and then popped back out. When I got home, I went straight to my computer and started looking up Bigfoot sightings in Oklahoma. I found a few accounts from around that time, but nothing exactly like what I'd seen. Most stories were from wooded areas, not right next to a dental office in a semi-residential area. That made it even weirder. Why was it there? Was it passing through? Had it been living near that abandoned house? The thought sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. I thought about going back to investigate, but I was too scared. What if it was still there? What if it wasn't alone? The idea of facing that thing again, especially alone, made my stomach clench, so I never did. I just stayed away from that area, and over time I tried to push it out of my mind, but it never really left me. Even now, years later, I'll have dreams about it. That dark, hulking figure moving silently, disappearing into the brush. I've never seen it again, and part of me is grateful for that. But another part wonders what it was, why it was there, and if anyone else has seen something similar. I didn't tell many people because, like I said, who would believe me? But writing this down, I feel a little better, like I'm not carrying it alone anymore. That day in November 2002, for those brief, terrifying moments, I saw something I can't explain, and it changed how I see the world. It's not just stories anymore, it's real, and that's what keeps me up at night. Story 7. It was a Friday, I think, because I'd just picked up my daughter from a late playdate at her friend's house. She was only about 5 years old then, and she'd fallen asleep in the back seat almost as soon as we left. The car was an old Honda Accord, nothing fancy, but it got us where we needed to go. We lived out in a kind of rural area, not super isolated, but enough that the roads got dark and quiet at night. This was in late fall, so it was already pitch black by 8 o'clock, and the air had that crisp, cold bite to it that makes you want to hurry home. I was driving down this 2-lane road that cuts through some woods and past a few farms. It's the kind of road where you might see deer or raccoons darting across, so I was used to keeping an eye out. My headlights were on high beam because there weren't any other cars around, and the trees lining the road made everything feel even darker. I remember the radio was playing some soft rock station low, just background noise, and I was glancing in the rearview mirror every few minutes to check on my daughter. She was curled up under her little blanket, breathing deep and steady, and I felt that usual parent worry about her being comfortable. Then, up ahead, maybe 100 yards or so, I saw something move near the edge of the road. At first, I thought it was just a deer. We get a lot of them around there, especially around dusk. I eased off the gas a bit, ready to slow down if it decided to cross. But as I got closer, the shape didn't look right. Deer move kinda graceful, you know. This thing was bigger, and it was standing upright. My heart started thumping harder, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, telling myself it was probably a bear or something. We don't have bears around there, but my mind was scrambling for explanations. Then it stepped into my headlights. I swear, my blood went cold. This wasn't a deer, and it wasn't a bear. It was tall, really tall, like 8 or 9 feet, and it was covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the light. It was walking on 2 legs, slow and deliberate, like it didn't have a care in the world. The hair was thick and matted, and I could see the muscles moving under it as it took each step. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and it had this broad, powerful build that made my car feel tiny. The worst part was that it never once looked at me. Its head was facing forward, like it was focused on where it was going, and it didn't even seem to notice the bright lights or the sound of my engine. I was frozen for a second, just staring. My mind was racing. What the hell is that? Is it a person in a costume? But no, it was too big, too real. The way it moved was unnatural but fluid, like it belonged there. I could hear my own breathing getting shallow, and I felt this surge of panic because my daughter was in the car. She was still asleep, completely unaware, and all I could think was that I had to protect her. For a split second, I considered hitting the gas and plowing into it. I mean, if it was some kind of animal, maybe I could scare it off or even take it down before it could hurt us. But then this fear washed over me. What if I just made it angry? What if it was strong enough to tear the car apart? I'd heard stories, you know, about Bigfoot or whatever, and in that moment, it felt like those stories were real. My hands were sweating on the wheel, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. I decided not to risk it. I slowed down even more, almost to a crawl, and just watched as it crossed the road. It took its time, each step heavy and silent. I didn't hear any footsteps, no crunching of leaves or anything, which was eerie as hell. The road was paved, but there was gravel on the shoulders, and yet it moved without a sound. When it reached the other side, it stepped down into the ditch and disappeared into the trees. Just like that, it was gone. No noise, no rustling, nothing. It was as if it had never been there. I sat there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I glanced back at my daughter, still asleep, thank God, and then I slammed on the gas. I didn't care about speed limits or anything. I just wanted to get home. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following us, but there was nothing. The road was empty, and the woods looked darker than ever. When I finally pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn off the ignition. I unbuckled my seatbelt and jumped out, then ran around to the back seat to get my daughter. She stirred a little when I picked her up, mumbling something in her sleep, but she didn't wake up. I carried her inside, my arms trembling, and locked the door behind me. Then I went through the whole house, checking every window and door, making sure they were locked tight. We lived in a single-story house, and I remember feeling exposed, like those walls couldn't protect us. I put my daughter to bed and just stood there watching her sleep for a while. She looked so small and peaceful, and I felt this overwhelming sense of helplessness. What if that thing had come after us? What could I have done? I was alone, with no one to help, and the thought of it still being out there made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every little noise made me jump. The creak of the house, the wind outside, anything. I kept getting up to peek out the windows, but I didn't see anything unusual. The fear was like a weight on my chest, and it stayed with me for days. I started having nightmares where I'd see that thing again, only this time it would be staring right at me, or worse, it would be near my daughter's window. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing, and I'd have to go check on her again. Over the years, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs, or someone playing a prank. But bears don't move like that. And who would be out in the middle of nowhere dressed like that? The memory never faded, and the fear never really went away. Then about 5 years ago, something happened that brought it all back. My mother was visiting, and she took my daughter, who was older by then, for a walk near an old strip mine not far from our house. It's a place where people go to hike sometimes, but it's kinda overgrown and isolated. They came back excited, saying they'd found these huge footprints in the mud. At first I thought they were joking, but when I went to look, I saw them myself. They were massive, like something from a giant, with deep impressions and what looked like toes. My brother is into that kind of stuff. He's always been interested in cryptids, so he came over and made a plaster cast of one of the prints. It's still in his garage, and every time I see it, I get that same cold feeling in my gut. Knowing that thing had a range in the area, even as new developments started pushing in, made it all feel more real. The terror of that night wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a reminder that there are things out there we don't understand, and sometimes we're powerless against them. I still drive that road sometimes, and I always slow down when I get to that spot, half expecting to see it again. But I never have, and part of me hopes I never will. The not knowing is almost worse than the seeing, because in my dreams, it's always there, waiting. Story 8. It was July of 1975, and the South Carolina heat was a whole different kind of animal compared to what I was used to in Florida. In Florida, you got the heat, sure, but you also got the sea breeze. Out there in Oconee County, at my grandparents' place, the air was just still. It was thick and heavy, like you were walking through hot soup. I was 15 that summer, all knees and elbows, and I was bored out of my skull. My grandparents were nice people, but their idea of a good time was watching the corn grow. I'd read all the comic books I'd brought twice, and the TV only got 2 channels, both of them fuzzy with preacher shows. So that's why I decided to go for a walk that afternoon. It was one of those decisions you make without thinking, just to escape the 4 walls of the house for a while. My grandpa had mentioned some woods out behind the property, land that butted up against where they were building the Duke power plant. He told me not to go too far, that it was easy to get turned around in there. At 15, you hear that, and it's not a warning, it's an invitation. I remember pulling the screen door shut behind me, the thwack sound it made, and the immediate wall of heat that hit my face. The cicadas were buzzing so loud it felt like the sound was inside my head. I crossed the back field, the dry grass crunching under my sneakers, and pushed into the tree line. The woods swallowed the sun. It got cooler right away, but it was a damp, shady cool, not a relief. The light was green and gold, filtering down through the leaves in broken pieces. The ground was soft with years of fallen leaves, and it was quiet, too quiet. The cicadas' noise from the field was just a distant hum now, like a fridge motor running in another room. I remember feeling a little prickly, a little on edge, but I shrugged it off. I told myself it was just because I was in a new place. I'd been walking for maybe 20-30 minutes, following no path in particular, just wandering. I was looking at the ground, kicking at rocks, when I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye, up ahead and to the right. I stopped dead. My heart, which had been thumping along normally, just locked up for a second and then started hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. About 50 yards away, up a gentle slope, there was something. It was big. No, that's not right. It was massive. It was between this cluster of pine trees and a big moss-covered rock, and it was moving up the incline. It wasn't walking like a man. It was powerful, like the way a gorilla moves, but upright. Its back was to me, and I could see the muscles working under its skin. Its skin wasn't skin, though. It was covered in this shaggy, reddish-brown hair, like a wet Irish setter, but darker in places, almost a rusty color. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my feet were nailed to the forest floor. I was just frozen, watching it. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. I'm 6 feet now, but back then I was shorter, and this thing just dwarfed any man I'd ever seen. It was built thick, solid, like a refrigerator, and it had no neck. Its head just seemed to sit right on its shoulders, a big, blocky shape. I couldn't see its face, thank God, but I could see the sheer bulk of it. It had to weigh 450 pounds, easy. It moved with this heavy, deliberate grace, like it knew the woods belonged to it. It wasn't in a hurry, it was just traversing the slope. Then a branch snapped under my foot. I didn't mean to move, but I must have shifted my weight. The sound was like a gunshot in that quiet. The thing stopped. It didn't just stop walking, its whole body went still. It was like someone had hit a pause button on the world. The air got even heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. Slowly, so slowly it was unnatural, it started to turn its head. I didn't see its eyes. I didn't need to. The second its head began to swivel in my direction, something primal in me broke loose. The fear wasn't just in my head anymore, it flooded my whole body, a cold electric current that jolted me into motion. I spun around and I ran. I didn't think about direction, I didn't think about tripping, I just ran. I pumped my arms and legs, my cheap sneakers skidding on the leaf litter. I could hear my own gasping breaths, ragged and too loud. And then I heard something else, a crash in the trees to my left. I risked a glance, my head whipping around for just a fraction of a second. It was running. It was running parallel to me, maybe 20, 30 yards away, keeping pace with me through the thick undergrowth. And it wasn't crashing through the brush. It was moving through it. The branches and saplings that would have slapped me in the face or tripped me up seemed to just part for it. It was fast, unbelievably fast for something that big. It moved in a low, powerful lope, its long arms swinging. That's when the sound started. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a scream, a high, piercing, tearing sound that felt like it was ripping right through my eardrums and into my brain. It was the most god-awful noise I've ever heard in my life, before or since. The only way I can ever describe it is if you took a cow and a pig, put them both in a wood chipper together, and amplified it by 1,000. It was a sound of pure agony and rage, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It was a sound that wanted to hurt you. The scream went right through me. It wasn't just heard, it was felt. It vibrated in my teeth, in my bones. My legs almost gave out. I felt a warm trickle down my leg, and I was too terrified to even be embarrassed. I was sobbing and running, my vision blurry with tears of pure, undiluted terror. I could hear it keeping pace with me, that horrible scream cutting through the woods again and again, echoing off the trees. It wasn't just chasing me, it was herding me, it was playing with me. All those stories my grandpa's neighbors had told me, the ones I'd laughed off as hick nonsense, came flooding back, screaming hollowed booger branch. They weren't just funny names on a map anymore. They were real places where real people had heard and seen things, and I was in the middle of it. I was the story now. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a couple of minutes. My lungs were on fire, and my side had a stitch so bad it felt like a knife was stuck in it. The trees started to thin out, and I saw a sliver of open field, the bright, hot sunlight a beacon ahead. I put every last bit of energy I had into a final, desperate sprint. I burst out of the tree line and into the tall grass of my grandparents' back field. I didn't stop running. I fell, scrambled back up and kept going, my legs like jelly. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the white of the house, that screen door. I hit the porch steps 2 at a time, yanked the door open so hard I thought the spring would break, and fell into the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind me and fumbling with the little hook lock. I collapsed on the linoleum floor, my chest heaving, my whole body shaking so violently I couldn't even sit up. I was covered in sweat, dirt, and leaves. My grandpa came in from the living room, his newspaper in his hand. "Boy, what in the world's got into you?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and irritation. I just lay there, gasping, trying to form words. All that came out were choked sobs. I couldn't tell him. I was 15. I was supposed to be tough. How could I say I'd just been chased by a monster from a ghost story? He'd think I'd lost my mind. He came over, helped me to the table, and got me a glass of water. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the glass. "You see a snake or something?" he asked, his brow furrowed. I just shook my head, still unable to speak. I drank the water, the coolness a stark contrast to the burning in my throat. I sat at that kitchen table for the rest of the afternoon, just staring at the wall. Every time a floorboard creaked or the wind rustled the trees outside, I jumped. The smell of my grandma's pot roast cooking for dinner usually made my mouth water, but that night it just made me feel sick. I never went back into those woods. Not that summer, not ever. A few days later, I overheard some of the old-timers at the general store talking in low voices about something unusual being seen near the power plant construction site, about how the dogs had been going crazy all week, barking at nothing. They mentioned screaming hollow. They didn't see me listening. I didn't say a word. I'm a grown man now, with kids of my own. I've been through a lot in life, but sometimes, late at night, if the wind is just right, or if I hear a distant animal cry that sounds a little off, I'm right back there. I'm 15 years old again, standing frozen in those green-shadowed woods, watching that huge reddish thing move up the slope. I feel that same cold dread wash over me. I remember the way it stopped, the way it turned, and I hear that scream, that awful tearing pig and cow scream that followed me out of the woods and has been echoing in the back of my head ever since. I never saw its face, but it saw me, and I know with a certainty that has never faded that it let me go. Story 9. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never told this to anyone, not the whole thing, not like this. My wife knows, obviously, because she was there for the first part, but we don't talk about it, ever. It's just this thing that sits between us, a cold spot in the room that we both walk around. But the other one, the one in 2006, that was just for me, and I need to get it out. I'm typing this with my hands still a little shaky, just thinking about it. It started back in the summer of 2000. We were living in Massachusetts at the time, in Franklin County. It was a hot, sticky July afternoon, the kind where the air feels like a wet blanket. My wife and I decided to get out of the house, just drive somewhere with a bit of a breeze. We ended up heading towards Rowe. It's all woods and hills out there, real pretty. We parked the car off one of the old logging roads that crisscross Nass Mountain. It wasn't a planned hike or anything, just a stroll. We were maybe 50, 60 yards into the trees, just following a faint deer trail, not a soul around. The woods were quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but that heavy, waiting quiet you get sometimes. The bugs were buzzing, and you could hear your own heartbeat in your ears. We were just walking, not saying much, just enjoying being out of the house. Then the sound started. It wasn't an animal sound. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what a deer sounds like, or a bear, or even a raccoon trundling through the undergrowth. This was different. This was a slow, deliberate crunch, 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 like someone was walking on 2 feet. Not the skittering of a four-legged animal, but the heavy, spaced-out footfalls of something walking upright, and it was getting closer. I stopped dead. My wife was a few steps ahead of me, and she stopped too. She turned and looked at me, her eyes wide. She heard it. We just stood there, frozen, listening. The sound was coming from our left, from a thick patch of young hemlocks and ferns. It wasn't running, it was just walking towards us. The crunching was so loud, each step sounded like it was snapping branches under its weight. I remember the smell, too. It's one of those details that sticks with you. The air, which had been all pine and damp earth, suddenly had this new smell. It's hard to describe. It was musky, like a wet dog, but sharper, almost like rotting meat and old blood. It was thick, and it made the back of my throat feel tight. My wife's hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Her fingers were digging into my skin. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her face was pure, undiluted fear. Her eyes were huge, locked on the spot where the sound was coming from. The crunching kept getting closer, steady, like it didn't have a care in the world, like it knew exactly where we were and was just taking its time. I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat telling me to run. My mouth went completely dry. I tried to peer into the trees, but the undergrowth was too thick. I couldn't see anything, just the shaking of ferns as whatever it was moved through them. But I could feel it. I could feel this presence. It was big. You could feel the weight of it in the air, this pressure that made it hard to breathe. It felt old, and it felt wrong, completely and utterly wrong for those woods. The sound was maybe 20, 30 feet away now. It was right there. My wife made this tiny, choked sound in the back of her throat, a whimper that was barely audible. That broke the spell. I grabbed her hand, my own grip just as tight, and I mouthed one word, "Go!" We didn't run at first. We backed up, fast, our eyes glued to the trees. Then my wife stumbled over a root, and that was it. Pure panic took over. We turned and we ran. We crashed through the woods, branches whipping at our faces and arms, not caring about the noise we were making. All I could think was that the crunching sound was going to speed up, that it was going to start running after us. I expected to feel a hand, a claw, something, grab my shoulder from behind at any second. We didn't stop until we burst out of the tree line and saw our car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the lock. We scrambled inside, slammed the doors, and I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I spun the car around, spraying gravel everywhere, and got us the hell out of there. We drove for 10 minutes in complete silence, both of us just breathing hard, staring straight ahead. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see some huge, dark shape loping after the car down the road. There was nothing, just an empty road. We never talked about it. Not really. We got home and she just went upstairs and took a shower. I sat at the kitchen table, my leg jiggling up and down, and just replayed the whole thing in my head. The sound, the smell, the feeling of being watched by something that knew it was the top predator in those woods. We told each other it was probably a bear, a weird one, walking on its hind legs for a bit. We tried to make it make sense, but we both knew. We both knew it wasn't a bear. That was it for 6 years. Life went on. We moved to a different town in the county. I got a new job. The memory of that day got pushed down, filed away in the back of my mind under things we don't think about. I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Almost. Then, in the fall of 2006, it came back. It was an October morning, early, still dark out. I had to be at work in East Deerfield for a 6 a.m. shift. I was driving down Route 2, the Mohawk Trail. It's a winding road that cuts through the mountains, and at that hour it's usually just me and the logging trucks. My headlights were cutting a path through the pre-dawn gloom, the trees on either side just black walls. I was coming up on one of the bridges, the one that goes over the Deerfield River. There's a long concrete guardrail on the right-hand side before you get to the bridge. As my headlights swept across it, I saw something, standing behind the guardrail, just standing there, still as a statue. It was tall, 6.5, 7 feet easy. It was covered in shaggy, matted brown hair like a filthy, unkempt rug. It was built thick, like a powerlifter, with these huge shoulders. but its head was kind of small for its body, and it was cone-shaped, sloping back. I didn't see its eyes, but I felt them. I knew it was looking right at the car, right at me. My brain short-circuited. It couldn't process what I was seeing. It was just there, this impossible thing, standing by the side of the road like it was waiting for a bus. The sight of it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. All the air went out of me. I drove past it. I couldn't do anything else. My foot was frozen on the gas pedal. For a second, there was just silence in the car, and then my brain caught up and screamed at me. What the hell was that? I had to look again. I had to know I wasn't going crazy. There was a turnout maybe a quarter mile down the road, a little gravel patch where you can pull over to look at the river. I slammed on the brakes, swerved into it, the tires crunching on the gravel. My heart was trying to beat its way out of my throat. I threw the car into reverse and backed up, staying on the shoulder, my headlights pointing back the way I came. I stopped, put it in park and stared. Nothing. The guardrail was empty. The spot where it had been standing was just empty. There were deep woods on the other side of that guardrail, a steep slope leading down to the river. It couldn't have just vanished. It was too big, too solid. But it was gone, completely gone. I sat there for I don't know how long, just staring at that empty spot. The first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the sky, turning it from black to a deep, bruised purple. The woods were silent, no birds, no nothing. It was the same heavy, waiting silence from 6 years earlier on Nass Mountain. That's when the fear really set in. Not the panicked run-for-your-life fear from the first time, but a deep, cold, sinking terror. This wasn't a one-time fluke in the deep woods. This thing was here. It was near where people lived and worked. It was standing by the goddamn road. I saw it. I know what I saw. It wasn't a man in a fursuit. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand that still, that straight. They don't have that shape. This thing was built all wrong for any animal I've ever seen. It was something else. I never told anyone. Who would I tell? The police. They'd think I was drunk or crazy. My co-workers, I'd be the office joke, even my wife. I couldn't bring that back into our house. I couldn't see that look of fear on her face again. So I buried it. I went to work that day. I did my job. I came home, and I acted like nothing happened, but something did happen, twice. And that second time, it felt like it saw me. It looked right at me. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I get this crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like I'm being watched. I'll look out the window into the dark trees behind our house, and I'll wonder if it's out there. If it remembers the car, if it remembers me. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it showed itself to me that second time. But I know it's real, and I know that whatever it is, it's still out there. Story 10. All right, so I've never told this to anyone outside of a couple of close friends, and even then I don't think they really believe me. But I need to get this out there to people who might actually understand. This happened back in July of 1993. I was 24 years old, and my girlfriend at the time, we'd been together for about a year. We decided to go camping for the weekend along the Santee River in Berkeley County, South Carolina. It was her idea, mostly. She loved the outdoors, and I was just happy to get away from my job for a couple days. We packed up my old Ford pickup on a Friday after work, threw a tent, some sleeping bags, a cooler full of beer and hot dogs, and just drove out until we found a spot that felt right. It wasn't an official campground or anything, just a place where the trees opened up right by the water. The river was wide there, maybe 70, 80 feet across, and on the other side was this massive cliff. It was huge, like 50 feet high, just this sheer wall of rock and dirt and trees growing out of it at weird angles. It felt ancient, like it had been there forever. We set up the tent maybe 30 yards from the riverbank, far enough back that we wouldn't get damp if the water rose, but close enough to have a good view. The first night was perfect, quiet. We made a fire, cooked dinner, had a few beers, and just talked under the stars. There was no one else around for miles, it felt like. We went to sleep with the sound of the river, that gentle, constant rushing. and it was the best sleep I'd had in months. The next day, Saturday, was just as good. We swam in the river, which was cold, but felt amazing in the July heat. We laid out on a big flat rock in the sun. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Everything was peaceful. We were just two people in the middle of nowhere, completely cut off, and it was great. As the sun started to go down, we built another fire. The sky turned this deep orange and then purple, and the woods got dark real fast. The sounds changed too. During the day, it's all birds and bugs. At night, it gets quieter, but you hear other things. Twigs snapping, the rustle of leaves. Normal stuff. You expect that. It must have been around 10 o'clock. We were just sitting by the fire, not talking much, just watching the flames. The fire was starting to die down, and I was thinking about putting another log on. That's when we heard the first splash. It wasn't a fish. I've heard fish jump. This was different. It was a heavy, solid sound. A loud thwump into the water, like someone had thrown a cinder block off the top of the cliff. We both froze and looked at each other. "What was that?" my girlfriend whispered. Her eyes were wide. I just shook my head. "I don't know. Big rock falling in?" We listened. For a minute there was nothing, just the river, then another one. Thwump. This one was closer to the base of the cliff, I thought. It was hard to tell with the way sound travels over water. It was just so heavy. It didn't sound natural. Then another one, and another. They weren't in a rhythm. It was random. A splash, then 30 seconds of silence, then two quick ones. It was unnerving. We stood up and walked a little closer to the water, but we couldn't see anything. The moon was out, but it was a crescent, not giving much light. The other side of the river was just a wall of blackness, with the top of the cliff silhouetted against the slightly lighter sky. This went on for what felt like forever. I looked at my watch. It was only 10:15. The splashing kept happening. It was all we could hear. We'd stopped talking. We just stood there, listening to these heavy impact sounds in the dark. My skin was crawling. It's a feeling I can't really describe. It wasn't just fear. It was this deep, primal unease. Something was wrong. After about 30 minutes of this, things got weirder. We started hearing this frantic splashing, like something struggling in the water. And then we saw them. Deer. A deer came running out of the woods on the other side of the river, right at the base of the cliff. It didn't hesitate. It just launched itself into the water, swimming frantically for our side. Then another one did the same thing, and another. They were panicked. I'd never seen anything like it. Deer are skittish. They don't just run headlong into a dark river in the middle of the night. They were fleeing something. My girlfriend grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Why are they doing that?" she said, her voice trembling. Before I could even form a thought, the splashing from the cliff stopped. Everything got quiet again, eerily quiet. The deer that had made it across scrambled up the bank and vanished into the woods behind us without a sound. The ones still in the water were just gone. It was like they'd been swallowed by the darkness. And then we heard it. From the base of the cliff, right where the deer had come from, there was a sound of something moving, something big. It wasn't walking through undergrowth, it was climbing. We could hear the scrape and crunch of dirt and rock, and the sound of branches, thick branches, snapping, not little twigs. These were loud cracks, like someone was breaking baseball bats over their knee. It was climbing the cliff. The cliff was practically vertical. I'd looked at it in the daylight. No person could climb that, not without gear, but this thing was, and it was fast. We could hear it moving upward, the sounds getting higher and higher. It was powerful. Each movement sounded deliberate and strong. I could feel the vibrations in my feet, or maybe I just imagined I could. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My girlfriend was shaking. "We have to go. Now," she said. She wasn't whispering anymore. It was a choked, desperate sound. I didn't argue. That feeling of unease had exploded into pure, icy terror. We turned and ran for the truck. We didn't grab anything. Not the tent, not the cooler, not our backpacks. We just ran. The truck was parked about 100 yards away, up a slight incline on an old logging road. It felt like a mile. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. My hands were slick with sweat. I could still hear that thing climbing. It had reached the top of the cliff. The sounds of breaking branches had stopped. Everything was quiet again, but it was a worse quiet. It was the quiet of something listening. I got the key in the lock, yanked the door open, and we scrambled inside. I slammed the doors shut and hit the lock button. The interior light had come on when we opened the doors, and for a second we were blinded. Sitting in this little bubble of light in the middle of all that darkness, I jammed the key into the ignition. My hand was shaking so bad I missed the slot twice. "Start the truck! Start the truck!" My girlfriend was begging, her voice high and tight. The engine turned over and roared to life. I flipped on the headlights. The beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees in front of us, the path we'd just run up. And then I swung the wheel, turning the truck to point back down the logging road toward the main gravel road. As the headlights swept across the woods to our left, toward the river, they lit up the edge of the tree line. And that's when we saw it. It was standing just outside the ring of trees, maybe 60 feet away. It had just stepped out of the shadows. My breath caught in my chest. I think I stopped breathing altogether. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 9 feet. It was covered in wet, dark hair, matted down like it had just come out of the river. Water was dripping off of it, glistening in the headlights. It was built, thick through the chest and shoulders, with arms that were too long, hanging down past its knees. But it was the way it stood that was so wrong. It wasn't standing up straight like a person. It was slumped at the waist, its upper body leaning forward, like it was permanently ready to charge. Its head was lowered, but it was looking right at us, and its eyes, they were red. Not like demon red or glowing red, but a solid, deep, bloody red, like the eyes of a possum caught in headlights, but 100 times more intense. There was no white, no pupil, just these two red orbs reflecting the light back at us. It just stood there, slumped over, soaking wet, staring into the cab of the truck. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound, it just looked at us. I don't know how long we sat there, frozen. It could have been 2 seconds or 20. Time just stopped. I could feel the weight of its stare. It wasn't a curious look. It wasn't angry. It was just aware. It knew we were there. It knew we were seeing it, and it was letting us see it. My girlfriend made a small whimpering sound next to me, a tiny gasp of pure terror. That broke the spell. I stomped on the gas. The truck's tires spun in the dirt for a second before grabbing, and we lurched forward down the path. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the dirt track in front of the headlights, driving way too fast for the conditions, swerving around potholes, branches whipping against the side of the truck. We didn't speak. She was crying quietly, and I was just gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. We hit the gravel road, and I didn't slow down until we were on the paved county road, miles away. We drove straight to my apartment and didn't sleep at all that night. We just sat on the couch with all the lights on, not saying a word. The next morning, in the cold light of day, we felt stupid. We started rationalizing it. Maybe it was a bear. A really big, weird-looking bear. Maybe the shadows and our fear had played tricks on us. We decided we had to go back. We had to get our stuff, and we had to know. We drove back out there around noon. The sun was high and bright. It looked so different, just a peaceful river and a cliff. Our campsite was a mess. The tent was still standing, but the cooler was tipped over, and our stuff was scattered around. It could have been raccoons. We started packing up as fast as we could, both of us jumpy, scanning the tree line constantly. That's when I saw them, in a patch of soft mud near the riverbank, right where we'd been standing the night before. Footprints. They were massive, way bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen. They were human-like, but not quite. The toes were splayed out, and the whole thing was long, maybe 18 inches from heel to toe, and they were deep. Whatever made them was heavy. incredibly heavy. And then the smell hit me. I hadn't noticed it at first, but now it was unmistakable. It was a thick, heavy stench, like dead fish left to rot in the sun, mixed with something else, something musky and foul, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead. It was the same smell that had been in the air for a split second last night, right before we saw it. I hadn't processed it then, but I remembered it now. It was the thing's smell. That smell, more than the footprints, more than the memory of those red eyes, sealed it for me. This was real. We hadn't imagined it. We hadn't seen a bear. We had seen something else, something that shouldn't exist. We threw the last of our gear into the truck and got out of there. We never went back to that spot. We broke up a few months later. I think the whole thing put a strain on us that we couldn't get past. It was too big, too weird. I still think about it sometimes, especially on quiet, dark nights. I think about the sound of those heavy splashes, the sight of those deer fleeing in panic, the sound of something impossibly strong climbing a 50-foot cliff, and those two red eyes just staring, knowing. I think about that smell, and I know, with a certainty that still chills me to the bone, that we were not alone out there. Something was in those woods with us, something old and powerful and completely beyond my understanding, and I have no idea what it was. Story 11. It was the 4th of July, and the air was thick with the smell of charcoal and citronella. I was back at my grandparents' old cabin in Belmont, Nebraska, a place that held a deep, quiet dread for me that no amount of family laughter could ever fully drown out. The cabin sits at the end of a long, winding dirt road, surrounded by woods so dense that by late afternoon, the shadows start to feel like they're pressing in. I'd spent most of the day trying to act normal, helping set up tables and chairs for the party, but my eyes kept drifting to the tree line, to that particular brush-covered hill behind the property. I knew something was out there. I'd known since I was a kid. The party was in full swing by early evening. Paper lanterns were strung up, casting a warm, shaky glow, and the buzz of conversation and classic rock from a portable speaker almost made me forget my unease. Almost. I was standing near the grill, a cold beer sweating in my hand, when I saw him, my cousin's friend, Mark. He was standing a little apart from everyone else, his back to the party, staring intently into the woods. His girlfriend, Sarah, was beside him, her hand on his arm, saying something to him, but he wasn't responding. His whole body was rigid. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I knew that posture. I'd lived that posture. I walked over, the festive noises fading into a dull roar in my ears. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mark didn't turn. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide. "We heard something," she said, her voice low. "A little while ago, when we were getting more ice from the car, it sounded like, I don't know, like something big walking through the brush." The knot in my stomach turned to ice. "On the hill?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mark finally looked at me then, and his face was pale, waxy under the lantern light. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Yeah, on the hill." I didn't need to hear any more. I knew. The memories came flooding back, not as clear pictures, but as physical sensations, the prickle on my neck, the coppery taste of fear in my mouth, the way my legs had felt like jelly. It started when I was 12. I was playing out on the front lawn as the sun went down, throwing a tennis ball for my grandparents' dog. The woods were just a dark shape then, a place for imagination and adventure. Then the sound came. It wasn't a howl, not a growl. It was a yell, a tremendously loud, guttural yell that seemed to rip through the quiet of the canyon. It was so powerful, so raw, it didn't feel like it could have come from an animal's lungs. It felt like it came from something that knew how to use its voice. The sound echoed, bouncing off the hills, and for a second, the whole world just stopped. The dog, who had been chasing the ball, froze in its tracks, its tail tucked so far between its legs it disappeared. Then it let out a terrified whine and bolted for the house. I wasn't far behind. I ran, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they'd crack. I burst through the screen door, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and told my parents what I heard. My dad just chuckled, took a sip of his beer, and said, "Relax, son. That's just a cow. They can make some god-awful noises sometimes." But I knew it wasn't a cow. You don't feel a cow's call in your bones. You don't have a primal, ancient part of your brain scream at you to run because of a cow. That sound was a possession of the space around it. It owned the air for those few seconds. I never played outside after dark again when we visited. Years passed. I got older, went to college, tried to write it off as a childhood scare. But the memory of that yell never left me. It was a splinter in my mind. In my early 20s, a friend of mine, Jake, got really into all that cryptid stuff. UFOs, skinwalkers, Bigfoot. He'd heard me talk about the cabin and that one sound, and he begged me to take him out there. He wanted to camp, to investigate. I was hesitant, but a part of me needed to know. Maybe I'd hear it again and finally prove to myself it was nothing. We drove out on a Friday night in late September. It was already fully dark when we pulled up the gravel drive, the headlights cutting shaky paths through the trees. The cabin was musty from being closed up, so we decided to get our sleeping bags and cooler from the car before settling in. We were carrying armfuls of supplies down the narrow trail from the parking spot to the front door, using the light from our phones to see. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a yell this time. It was footsteps. Heavy, deliberate crunch, 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 sounds moving through the dry leaves and underbrush on the hill directly behind us, the hill that rose steeply from the back of the cabin. Jake and I both stopped dead at the same time. "You hear that?" he whispered. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The sound was unmistakably bipedal. Two legs, a left-right rhythm, but it was too heavy for a person, way too heavy. It sounded like someone was walking with weighted boots, each step cracking twigs and crushing leaves with a force that seemed to vibrate through the ground. We stood there frozen, listening as it paced parallel to the trail, maybe 30 yards up the slope, hidden by the pitch-black wall of trees and thick brush. Then, the second we both fully registered it and turned our heads toward the noise, it stopped. Just like that. The woods went silent. Not a normal quiet, but a dead, heavy silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. The crickets had stopped chirping. There was nothing. We didn't move. We barely breathed. The only sound was the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. That's when the stick snapped. It wasn't a small twig. It was a thick branch, the sound a loud, wet crack that tore through the silence like a gunshot. It came from exactly where the footsteps had stopped. Jake, who was still holding a case of beer, dropped it. The bottles shattered on the rocky path, the sound absurdly loud and out of place. "The hell was that?" he hissed, his voice shaking. I fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight we'd brought, my hands slippery with sweat. I clicked it on, and the bright beam cut a wobbly circle into the darkness. I pointed it up the hill, toward the source of the sound. My arm was trembling. The light swept over tree trunks, leaves, shadows that danced and twisted. We were scanning the area, our breaths puffing out in little white clouds in the suddenly cold air. And then, we both felt it. It's hard to describe, but it was a physical urge, a deep, instinctual command that slammed into both of us at the same time. Do not shine the light over there. It wasn't a voice, it was a feeling, a certainty that settled in the pit of my stomach like a stone. If I moved the beam just a few feet to the left, I would see it, and seeing it would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. My finger was on the button, but I couldn't make my wrist turn. It was pure, undiluted terror. It was the fear of a prey animal that knows the predator is watching. Jake was staring past me toward the car we'd just left. His face was a mask of pure horror, his mouth hanging open. He wasn't looking where the light was. He was looking at a spot about 50 feet away, near the edge of the tree line, where the woods met the clearing. "What?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "What do you see?" He didn't answer. He just pointed a trembling finger. I slowly, so slowly, turned my head, following his line of sight. I didn't move the flashlight. I just looked, and I saw it. It was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall and broad-shouldered, standing just at the edge of the darkness, half hidden behind a thick oak tree. It was so much bigger than any man. It was just a silhouette, a shape of pure blackness that seemed to absorb the faint ambient light from the cabin windows. It was standing perfectly still, but I could feel its attention on us. I could feel it looking. That was the terror moment, the one that is burned into my brain forever. It wasn't what we saw, but what we felt. A wave of primal, mind-numbing fear that washed over us. It was a chemical reaction in our bodies, an ancient alarm bell screaming that we were not at the top of the food chain. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. We both turned and ran. We bolted for the cabin door, our feet slipping on the gravel, our arms pumping. I've never moved so fast in my life. It was a blind, panicked sprint. We crashed through the door, slamming it shut behind us, fumbling with the deadbolt with shaking, clumsy fingers. We spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, sitting with our backs against the wall, not talking, just listening. We heard nothing else, but we both knew it was still out there. That was months ago. I tried to bury the memory, to convince myself it was a bear, a trick of the light, anything but what I knew in my gut it was. But standing here now, watching Mark fall apart, all of that came rushing back. "What did you see, Mark?" I asked him, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the woods. He was trembling, a fine, constant shake that seemed to come from his core. He was a big guy, a construction worker, not someone who scared easily. "Mark," Sarah pleaded, her voice tight with fear, "tell us." He finally tore his gaze away from the trees and looked at me. His eyes were haunted, hollow. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. The words came out choked, forced. "It wasn't a man," he said. "It was standing on two legs, but it wasn't a man." That was all he could say. He just kept shaking his head, repeating it in a low mumble. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a man. That was the confirmation. That was the end of any doubt. My childhood fear, my experience with Jake, it was all real. There was something living in these woods, something that watched us from the shadows on that hill, something that knew we were here. The party kept going around us, laughter ringing out as fireworks started to pop and sizzle in the distance, painting the sky in brief, colorful flashes. But for me, Mark and Sarah, the world had shrunk down to the dark tree line and the unseen presence lurking within it. The dread that settled over me was heavier than any blanket. It was a cold, permanent weight. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that it had been there all along, watching, waiting, and I knew it would be there long after we were all gone. I never went back to that cabin after that night. I couldn't. Just the thought of those woods, that hill, the feeling of being watched. It's enough to make my hands shake even now, years later. I still don't know what it was. I just know it wasn't a man. Story 12. The day was good, really good. We caught a bunch of smallmouth bass. The sun was warm but not too hot, and Duke was in heaven, perched at the front of the old aluminum boat like some kind of furry captain, his ears perked up, taking in all the new smells. We'd packed light, a tent, sleeping bags, a cooler with some beers and stuff for the fish, a small camp stove. We wanted to be remote, you know, really get out there. We found a spot to camp in the late afternoon, a little gravel bar that stuck out into the river, backed by a steep, wooded bank. It was isolated, which was exactly what we wanted. No sounds of cars, no people, just the water and the wind in the trees. We set up the tent, got a fire going, and fried up the fish we'd kept. It was one of those meals that just tastes better because of where you are. Duke got his share, of course, and then curled up by the fire, content. We turned in when it got fully dark, maybe around 10. The fire was just embers, and the sounds of the night were starting up. Frogs, crickets, the occasional splash from the river. It was peaceful. I remember lying there in my sleeping bag, listening to my friend's steady breathing and Duke's little snores from the foot of the tent, thinking, this is it. This is why you do this. Then, around midnight, everything changed. I woke up because it got cold, really cold all of a sudden. I fumbled for my sleeping bag zipper and realized the inside of the tent was wet, not from rain, but from a thick, heavy fog that had rolled in off the river. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. The mesh window of the tent was just a solid wall of white. All the night sounds had gone completely silent. It was that kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a weight on your chest. That's when Duke woke up too. He didn't just stir. He went from dead asleep to a low, rumbling growl in half a second, a growl I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't his, I hear a squirrel growl. It was deep, guttural, coming from the very bottom of his chest. The hair on his back was standing straight up. He was rigid, staring out through the tent mesh into that impossible whiteness. My friend mumbled, "What's his problem?" Before I could even answer, Duke let out a sharp bark, and then he was gone. He hit the tent flap so hard the whole tent shook, and he just shot out into the fog. We both scrambled up, yelling his name. The silence outside was absolute. We couldn't hear his paws on the gravel. Nothing. It was like the fog had just swallowed him whole. Then we heard it, a thump, a solid, meaty sound like someone hitting a side of beef with a sledgehammer. It was followed by a high-pitched yelp from Duke that was cut off almost instantly. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I lunged for the tent zipper, but my friend grabbed my arm. "Wait," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. A second later, there was a scrabbling sound on the gravel, and Duke came flying back into the tent. He didn't walk. He scrambled, crawling on his belly, whining like a puppy. He was trembling so hard I could feel the vibrations through the tent floor. He shoved himself into the farthest corner behind our backpacks and just hid, pressing his body into the ground, his tail tucked so far between his legs it was gone. He was panting, drooling, his eyes wide and white-rimmed with pure terror. I reached for him, and he flinched, whining louder. This is a dog that once faced down a charging stray dog without backing down an inch. He was broken. Something had broken my dog in less than 10 seconds. We just sat there, frozen, listening to his panicked breathing, and that's when we heard the other sound. Footsteps. They were slow, and they were heavy, not like a person walking. Each step was a deliberate crushing sound on the gravel with a pause in between. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. And they had this low vibration to them, a deep thump you could feel in your bones more than you could hear. They were circling the camp, not close, but not far either, just out there in the fog. Then came the breathing. It was deep. So deep it was like a bass note from a giant speaker, a heavy, wet, rhythmic hoo, ha, ha, ha. It sounded huge. It sounded like something with lungs the size of basketballs. My friend and I looked at each other. I could see the sheer panic in his eyes, reflected in the dim light from our flashlights, which we'd fumbled to turn on. We didn't say a word. We just moved instinctively, turning so we were sitting back to back in the middle of the tent, each of us holding a flashlight, pointing them out at the walls of the tent. Our beams were useless. They just lit up the thick, swirling fog, turning it into a blinding white prison. We couldn't see more than 2 feet in any direction. The footsteps kept circling. Crunch, pause, hoo, ha, crunch. Then the splashes started. It wasn't a fish jumping. It was a loud, concussive ka-sploosh, like someone had just heaved a cinder block into the river. Then another one, from a slightly different spot. And another. It sounded like boulders were being thrown into the water. The sound was massive, echoing in the dead silence. We just sat there, back to back, our shoulders pressed together so hard it hurt. I could feel him shaking. I know I was shaking too. My knuckles were white where I was gripping my flashlight. My mouth was so dry I couldn't have spoken if I'd tried. This thing, whatever it was out there, and it was big, and it was letting us know it was there. Then something hit the side of the tent. It wasn't a rock, not yet. It was a softer thud, like a clump of mud. It made the nylon walls shudder. Duke let out a terrified whimper from his hiding spot. A few seconds later, the first rock came. It whistled as it flew through the air, a sharp, slicing sound, and then it hit the gravel about 5 feet from the tent with a loud crack. I felt the impact through the ground. Gravel and dirt sprayed against the side of the tent. My friend gasped. "What the hell?" Another whistle, another crack, this one even closer. Dirt peppered the tent fly. They were throwing rocks at us, not little pebbles. These were fist-sized stones, maybe bigger, and they were being thrown with incredible force. They were aiming for the camp. They were trying to hit the tent. One hit so close to my head, just on the other side of the tent wall, that the spray of dirt and small stones hit the nylon right by my ear. I flinched back so hard, I cracked my head against my friend's. We both cried out. The terror in that moment was absolute. It was a cold, sharp fear that went right down to my core. We were sitting ducks. We couldn't see it, but it could see us. Or at least it knew exactly where we were, and it was armed. We stayed like that, back to back, for what felt like an eternity. The rock throwing would stop for a few minutes and then start up again. The footsteps never stopped their slow, deliberate circle. The heavy breathing was a constant, oppressive presence, and then we'd hear the sound of branches snapping from the woods behind us. Not little twigs. These were thick, woody cracks, like someone was breaking small trees in half. After a while, maybe an hour into this nightmare, the fog shifted for just a second. The beam of my flashlight, which had been pointing uselessly at the white wall, suddenly punched through a thin spot, and I saw it. It was just a silhouette, black against the lesser black of the woods, but it was enough. It was tall, so damn tall. It had to be 9 feet, easy. It was standing upright, on 2 legs, and it was covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair. It was moving, not walking, but almost gliding, with a powerful, fluid gait that was way too fast for something that size. It was circling us, just like we'd thought, but seeing it, even for that half second before the fog swallowed it again, made my blood run cold. It was real. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else. The rest of the night was a blur of pure, unadulterated terror. The circling never stopped. The footsteps, the breathing, the occasional thrown rock, the sound of things breaking in the woods. We didn't move. We couldn't. We were paralyzed. We just sat there, our flashlights getting dimmer as the batteries drained, listening to this thing toy with us. It never tried to get in the tent. It never made a direct attack. It just stayed. It made sure we knew it was there, that it was in control, that we were trapped. It was a game to it, a cruel, terrifying game. I've never been so scared in my entire life. It was a deep, primal fear that bypassed all thought. My body was screaming at me to run, but my brain knew that running into that fog, towards that thing, was a death sentence. So we sat, we waited. Every minute felt like an hour. I watched the digital clock on my phone, the numbers changing with agonizing slowness. 1 in the morning, 2, 3. The worst part was the smell. After a while, I started to notice it, a musky, foul odor, like wet dog and rotten meat, that would waft into the tent whenever the thing passed close by on its rounds. It was a smell that made you want to gag, a smell of something wild and unclean. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the blackness outside the tent began to turn to grey. The fog was still there, but it was getting lighter. The night was ending. The footsteps, which had been a constant for hours, suddenly stopped. The breathing stopped. The silence returned. But this time it was different. It was just the normal silence of early morning. We didn't move until the sun was fully up, burning away the last of the fog. It must have been around 6 in the morning. The world outside was bright and normal. Birds were singing. The river was gurgling. It was like the whole night had been a bad dream. My friend was the first to speak, his voice a dry croak. "Is it gone?" I just nodded, my body aching from being locked in one position for so long. We slowly, carefully unzipped the tent and looked out. Our camp was a wreck. The fire pit was scattered, our cooler was tipped over, but the worst was the boat. Our aluminum boat, which we'd pulled up on the gravel, was dented. Not a little dent. There was a huge, fist-shaped dent in the side of it, and long, deep scratches in the metal, like something with massive claws had tried to grip it. We packed up in a frantic, silent hurry. We didn't speak. We just threw everything into the dented boat, grabbed a still trembling Duke, and got the hell out of there. We didn't even bother fishing. We just rowed as fast as our shaking arms could carry us back towards the truck. We never talked about it much afterwards. What was there to say? We both knew what we saw, what we heard, what we felt. It changed something in me. That feeling of peace I had in the wilderness, that comfort in being alone in the woods. It's gone. It's been replaced by a low-level hum of anxiety whenever I'm out in the deep woods. I still go camping, but I stick to busy campgrounds now. I never stay out after dark. And Duke was never the same either. He's jumpier now, nervous around loud noises. He doesn't like being outside at night. Sometimes if we're out in the yard and he hears a branch snap in the woods behind the house, he'll get that same look in his eyes. That same terrified whine will start in his throat, and he'll run for the door. I'll never be able to explain what happened that night on the Wabash. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. All I know is that something was out there with us. Something powerful and intelligent and cruel, and it decided to spend the night letting us know just how small and helpless we really were. The memory of those slow, vibrating footsteps, that deep breathing, and the sound of those rocks whistling out of the fog, that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. It's been years, and I can still hear it all, clear as day, like it just happened. Story 13. It was the summer of 1982, and I was 10 years old. We lived in an old farmhouse in the Tennessee mountains, a place so deep in the woods that the sun had to fight its way through the trees just to hit the ground. My dad, wanting to give me my own little world, built me a treehouse. It wasn't just in the backyard. It was a good half-mile hike into the woods, up a big old oak tree that felt like it was holding up the sky. That treehouse was my kingdom. I spent most of my days up there, reading comic books, pretending I was an explorer, just watching the world from my little wooden perch. It started small, so small I almost didn't notice. I'd go up to the treehouse and find a pine cone sitting right in the middle of the floor, a perfect one, not broken or anything. I figured maybe the wind blew it in, or a squirrel dropped it. But then it happened again. A smooth grey river rock, cool to the touch. Then a little bunch of wildflowers, the purple ones that grew near the creek. They were always placed neatly, not just scattered. It was weird, but I was a kid. So my first thought was my dad. He was always doing stuff to make me smile. I asked him about it one evening while he was fixing the porch step. "Hey, Dad, you leaving me those little presents in the treehouse?" He looked up, his forehead all wrinkled. "Presents? What presents?" "You know, the rocks and the flowers and stuff." He shook his head and went back to hammering. "Ain't me, kiddo. Must be your forest friends." I believed him. My dad wasn't one for little surprises like that. If he was gonna do something, he'd tell you about it. So that got me thinking, if it wasn't him, who was it, or what? I wasn't scared, not then. I was curious. It felt like a secret, my own personal mystery. So I decided to try something. The next time I went up, I took a peanut butter sandwich from lunch. I left it on a little plate I'd brought from the house, right in the center of the floor. I remember it was a hot, still afternoon, and the woods were so quiet you could hear the leaves rustling 100 yards away. I went home, my heart thumping a little with excitement, wondering what I'd find the next day. The next morning I practically ran the whole half-mile. The sandwich was gone, completely gone, and in its place was a feather. It was long, maybe from a hawk or an eagle, a beautiful mottled brown and white. Next to it was a little ring, perfectly woven from dried grass. My breath caught in my throat. This was real. Someone or something was accepting my gift and giving one back. It was the most incredible feeling I'd ever had. That started our little exchange. I'd leave an apple or a handful of saltine crackers from the cupboard. I'd get back a bundle of sweet-smelling pine needles or another feather or a strangely shaped stick that looked like a little person. I never saw anyone. I'd go up, leave my offering, and by the next day it would be swapped out. I started staying later, hoping to catch a glimpse, but I never saw or heard a thing. The woods would just get darker, and I'd have to hurry home before my mum started to worry. The day it happened was a Thursday. I remember because my uncle was coming for dinner the next night. I'd stayed later than usual, reading a book, until the words started to blur in the fading light. The air was getting cool, and that deep, earthy smell of the forest at night was starting to rise. I knew I had to go. I climbed down the wooden slats nailed into the tree trunk, my hands feeling the rough bark. My feet had just touched the soft, mossy ground when I saw it. Movement to my left, near the base of a big pine tree. I froze. My whole body went stiff. At first I thought it was a bear cub. We had black bears around and you learned to be careful, but this wasn't a bear. It was standing up. It was small, maybe only 4 feet tall, and it was covered in dark brown hair, almost black in the shadowy light. It wasn't bulky like a bear. It was lean, with long arms that hung down by its sides. Its face, God, its face is something I'll never forget. It was more human than any animal I'd ever seen, but not quite human. The eyes were what got me. They were huge and dark, like 2 pools of oil, and they were fixed right on me. There was no white to them, just deep, liquid black. They didn't look mean or angry. They looked curious, intelligent. It had a flat nose and a wide mouth, but it was the eyes that held me. I couldn't look away. It was holding something in its hands, a little bundle of sticks tied together with a vine. It took a slow, silent step forward and placed the bundle gently on the ground, right in the middle of the little clearing between the trees. It never broke eye contact with me. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I was paralyzed, a statue in the middle of the woods. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It just melted. It turned its head, looked back into the deep woods, and then it was gone. It slipped between the trees without making a single sound. No rustle of leaves, no snap of a twig. 1 second it was there, a solid thing, and the next, the space where it had been was just empty shadow. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but it was probably only a few seconds. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would break them. The fear didn't hit me all at once. First, there was just this overwhelming shock. Then, a cold dread started to creep up from my feet, turning my legs to jelly. I looked at the bundle of sticks on the ground. It was a gift, for me. I didn't pick it up. I turned and I ran. I ran like the devil himself was on my heels. Branches whipped at my face and arms, scratching me, but I didn't feel a thing. I just pumped my legs, my breath coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. I didn't look back. I burst out of the tree line into our backyard and slammed into the back door, fumbling with the knob before stumbling into the warm-lit kitchen. My mum was at the stove. "Land sakes, what's gotten into you? You're white as a sheet." I just shook my head, my chest heaving. I couldn't form the words. How could I? I just saw something. An animal scared me. It was the best I could do. She smiled a little. "This is the woods, honey. You see all kinds of things. Go wash up for dinner. I went to the sink and splashed cold water on my face, my hands trembling. It wasn't an animal. I knew it wasn't an animal. It was my friend, the one who'd been leaving the gifts. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those weeks it had been that thing, that creature, and it had been watching me. It knew I was the one leaving the food. It had come to see me. The terror of that moment slowly faded over the next few days, replaced by a buzzing, nervous wonder. I went back to the treehouse. I had to. The bundle of sticks was still there. I finally picked it up. It was carefully made, the sticks all similar in length, the vine wrapped tight. I started leaving food again, apples mostly, and the gifts kept coming. More feathers, sometimes berries I didn't recognize, little piles of shiny pebbles. I never stayed late again. I'd leave the food and get out of there before the sun even thought about setting. I never saw it again, but I felt it. I always had this feeling of being watched, but it wasn't a bad feeling. It was a presence, a quiet, observing presence. Everything changed a few weeks later. My uncle was over for dinner, like I said he would be. He was a hunter, knew those woods better than anyone. We were eating fried chicken, and he was telling my dad about tracking a deer down near the creek. Didn't find the deer, he said, wiping gravy from his chin. But I saw something else, something I ain't never seen before. My ears perked up. I stopped eating, my fork hovering in midair. Big, my uncle said, his voice dropping a little, bigger than a man, covered in dark hair, like a gorilla. It was standing on two legs, just on the other side of the creek, looking right at me. Then it turned and moved off into the trees. Didn't make a sound. Wasn't no bear, I'll tell you that much. Bears don't move like that. This thing, it moved smooth, like it belonged there. The piece of chicken in my mouth turned to sawdust. My little friend, the one that was 4 feet tall, it wasn't alone. There was a bigger one, a parent, a protector. The woods suddenly felt 1,000 times bigger and darker. My secret friendship didn't feel so magical anymore. It felt dangerous. The wonder was still there, but it was now wrapped in a cold, hard layer of fear. What had I been communing with all this time? And what else was out there, watching? The gift started to fade after that. I'd leave an apple, and it would just sit there, untouched, until it started to rot. The feathers and the rocks stopped appearing. The presence I'd felt was gone. The woods around my treehouse felt empty. Just normal woods again. It was like whatever had been there had moved on, or maybe it had decided I wasn't worth the risk anymore. A month or so later, my dad came to me one Saturday morning. "Gonna take that treehouse down today," he said matter-of-factly. My heart sank. Why? Trees getting old. Don't want it coming down in a storm with you in it. Besides, you're getting too big for it. I didn't argue. In a strange way, I was almost relieved. The magic was gone, and all that was left was the memory and a deep, unsettling chill. I helped him carry the boards and nails back to the barn. We didn't talk much. When we were done, I looked back at the big oak tree. It looked lonely without its little house. I never told anyone the whole story, not until now. Not the part about seeing it. My dad probably thought I'd just outgrown my imaginary friend. But it wasn't imaginary. I know what I saw. I had a friend in the woods that summer, a non-human friend, and I'm as sure as I'm sitting here that it was a young one, a juvenile Bigfoot or whatever you want to call it. It left me with more than just a bunch of feathers and rocks. It left me with this feeling, this connection to those deep, dark woods that I've never been able to shake. A sense of wonder, yeah, but also the chilling knowledge that we share this world with things we can't even begin to understand. And sometimes, just sometimes, they decide to leave you a gift. Story 14. It was one of those thick, humid summer days in Darlington County. The kind where the air feels like a wet wool blanket the second you step outside. The year was 1983. I was 15 years old, and my dad had decided we needed a day out on the Great PD River, just the two of us and his old aluminum motorboat. It wasn't anything fancy, that boat. The paint was chipped, The motor was loud and smoked a little, but it was ours. It was freedom. We'd packed a cooler with bologna sandwiches and RC colas, and we'd brought along my dad's .22 pistol, the one he used for plinking at cans. It was a single-shot, bolt-action thing, nothing powerful, but it felt like a cannon in my hands. He'd been letting me fire it for a couple of years, always with him right there, always with the same lecture about safety. That day, he'd said I could do some target practice at logs or whatever we saw floating in the water. It felt like a big deal. We put in at the public landing around 10 in the morning. The river was high and muddy from recent rains, the color of weak coffee with a lot of cream. The current was strong, pulling at the boat, and my dad had to fight the motor a bit to keep us on course. We didn't talk much, we never did. It was a comfortable silence, just the two of us listening to the putter of the outboard and the buzz of insects in the cypress trees that lined the banks. The smell was a mix of gasoline, river mud, and that sweet, rotting smell of swamp. We'd been going for maybe an hour, just puttering along, not really headed anywhere specific. I remember the sun was almost directly overhead, beating down, and I was sweating through my t-shirt. My dad cut the engine to let us drift for a while, to just enjoy the quiet. The sudden silence was heavy. All you could hear was the water slapping against the hull and the distant call of some bird. That's when I asked if I could shoot the .22. He nodded, his eyes scanning the far bank. See that old cypress knee sticking up out of the water, about 50 feet out? Try for that. I remember my hands were a little shaky as I loaded the single cartridge. The bolt was stiff, and it made a solid clack when I closed it. I got into position, resting my elbows on my knees, the hot metal of the gun barrel warming my skin. I took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot was incredibly loud, shattering the afternoon quiet. It echoed off the water, rolling back at us from the woods. A flock of birds exploded from the trees downstream. I saw a little splash of water near the cypress knee. I'd missed, but it was close. Not bad, my dad said, a rare smile touching his lips. Load her up again. Try for that clump of leaves drifting by. I did. I fired 3 more times. Each shot was a jolt, a loud, sharp punctuation in the stillness. Each time, the echo seemed to take longer to fade. After the 4th shot, I remember feeling a kind of unease settle over me. It was too quiet afterwards. The birds had stopped calling. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. It was like the whole river was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. We were drifting, slowly turning in the current. My dad was facing me, looking back the way we'd come. I was looking toward the bank, a few hundred feet away. The bank there wasn't sandy. It was a steep, raw clay wall, maybe 8 or 10 feet high, stained dark from the water and crumbling in places, and at the base of it, right where the murky water met the land, something was squatting. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of the shape. It was just a dark, reddish-brown mass. I thought it was a bear. We have black bears in South Carolina, but they're, well, black. This thing was the color of rust and dried blood, and it was huge, way bigger than any bear I'd ever seen in a book or at the zoo. It was in a deep squat, like a football player waiting for a snap. Its arms were resting on its knees, and they were impossibly long, corded with muscle. The shape of it was all wrong. It was too broad in the shoulders, too narrow in the waist. The head was kind of cone-shaped, sitting directly on its shoulders with no real neck to speak of. Then it moved. It turned its head, not a quick, jerky animal movement. It was a slow, deliberate turn, like it knew we were there, and it was finally deciding to acknowledge us. And its eyes. I will never, ever forget its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were dark, intelligent, and they locked directly onto mine from across that stretch of water. A chill ran down my spine, so cold it felt like someone had poured ice water down my back. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I just stared back, frozen. "Dad," I finally managed to croak out. It was barely a whisper, He must have heard the terror in my voice because he spun around. He followed my gaze. I heard him suck in a sharp breath. The thing didn't snarl. It didn't make a sound. It just held my gaze for what felt like an eternity, those deep-set eyes seeming to take in everything about me. It knew I was the one who had been shooting. I felt that in my gut. It knew. Then, in one fluid, powerful motion, it pushed off from its squat. It didn't stand up. It just launched itself sideways, straight into the river. There was no big splash, not like you'd expect from something that massive. It entered the water almost cleanly, like a diver, and it was gone. The brown, churning water swallowed it up without a trace. For a long moment, neither of us moved or spoke. The boat continued to drift. The only sound was the water and the frantic beating of my own heart in my ears. "What in God's name was that?" my dad finally said, his voice low and tight. I just shook my head. I couldn't form words. My hands were trembling, and I realized I was still holding the .22. It felt useless now, a stupid toy. "Start the engine," I begged him. "Please, start the engine." He didn't argue. He yanked the pull cord on the motor, and it sputtered to life on the second try. The sound was a relief, a piece of the normal world crashing back in. He gunned it, and the boat surged forward, the bow lifting. We weren't running away exactly. We were heading toward the spot where it had gone in. "What are you doing?" I yelled over the roar of the motor. "We gotta see," he yelled back. His face was pale, his knuckles white on the tiller. "We gotta know." He steered us straight for the clay bank. As we got closer, he cut the engine again, and we coasted the last 20 feet, bumping gently against the steep, muddy wall. The place where it had been squatting was right there. The clay was wet and slick. We could see the marks. There, in the soft, wet clay, were 2 huge, deep impressions from its feet. They weren't footprints, not really. They were just smears, like something massive had pushed off hard. And above them, where its hands or arms had been resting, were more smudges, deep grooves in the earth. But there was nothing else, no tracks leading away, no sign of it coming out of the water downstream. It had gone in and vanished. My dad leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the murky water. It was impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. "It can't have just disappeared," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "A thing that big." We both scanned the opposite bank, the water upstream and down. Nothing. The forest was silent. The river just flowed, brown and indifferent. The reality of what we'd seen started to sink in, and with it came a fresh wave of fear. We were in a flimsy aluminum boat on a wide, deep river, and something that shouldn't exist was in the water with us, or had been. The thought of it swimming underneath us right now was paralyzing. "We're leaving," my dad said, and his voice left no room for argument. He started the motor again, and this time he didn't head toward the spot. He turned the boat around and opened the throttle all the way. We flew back down the river, bouncing on the waves, the wind whipping tears from my eyes. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead, on the safety of the landing we'd left from. The whole ride back, we didn't speak. What was there to say? We'd both seen it. There was no dismissing it, no explaining it away as a trick of the light or a weird bear. When we got to the landing, my dad's hands were still shaking as he winched the boat onto the trailer. He fumbled with the straps. We loaded our gear into the truck in a frantic hurry, throwing the cooler and the life jackets in the back, not caring about the mess. I held onto that .22 like it was a lifeline, even though I knew in my heart it wouldn't have done a thing. We didn't talk about it on the drive home. We didn't talk about it that night at dinner with my mom. We didn't talk about it for years. It was like an unspoken agreement. If we didn't say it out loud, it couldn't be real, but it was real. I saw it. He saw it. The thing that haunts me the most, even now, all these years later, isn't just its size or its strangeness. It's the intelligence in its eyes. That thing looked at me, It saw me, a kid with a gun that had just been making a whole lot of noise. It looked right at me and it knew, and then it chose to leave. It just slid into that dark water and was gone, leaving behind nothing but a couple of smears in the clay and a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach that has never really gone away. I'd been firing a gun just minutes before. I'd been feeling tough, like a man. And in one look, that thing stripped all of that away and showed me just how small and helpless I really was. We never went back to that stretch of the river again. Ever. Story 15. It was one of those sticky July afternoons in South Carolina where the air feels like wet wool against your skin. I remember the exact date because it was the weekend after the 4th, so it would have been around the second week of July, 1987. My sister was driving us down Highway 17 through Okin County to visit some friends who lived out near the coast. We had the windows rolled down because the AC in her old Ford pickup had given up the ghost about a month prior, and the wind whipping through the cab was the only thing keeping us from melting into our seats. The road out there is mostly just a straight shot through pine forests and swampland, long stretches of nothing broken up by the occasional dirt road leading off to God knows where. We were just talking, normal stuff. She was telling me about some trouble she was having with her boyfriend, and I was mostly just listening, nodding along, watching the trees blur past. The sun was starting to get low, casting long, deep shadows across the asphalt. But it was still plenty bright out. We were maybe 20 minutes from our friend's place, just coming up on one of those swamp bridges. The kind where the road lifts up a little over a stretch of black stagnant water and cypress trees draped in that creepy Spanish moss. I was mid-sentence when I saw it. Up ahead, right in the middle of our lane, maybe 150 yards out, a dark shape. My first thought, my genuine first thought, was that it was a bear. You see them sometimes, especially around dusk, crossing the roads. They look big and black and shaggy from a distance. "Whoa, bear," I said, pointing. My sister saw it too, and she let off the gas, starting to slow down. We weren't going to hit it, we had plenty of room to stop, but you always slow down for a bear. You don't know if it's going to dart one way or the other. As we got closer, maybe 75 yards now, something felt off. It was the way it was hunched over. It was big, way bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, and its fur wasn't black. It was a dark, muddy brown, almost like wet bark. It was just a massive shape, and it was moving, but not like an animal rooting around. It was deliberate. Its shoulders were working, like it was pulling at something on the road. My sister, she gave a short, sharp tap on the horn. Not a long blare, just a little, "Hey, get out of the way," beep. That's when it stood up. It didn't unfold like a person. It was this powerful, fluid motion, like a spring uncoiling. 1 second it was on all fours, a huge hulking mound in the road, and the next it was upright, on 2 legs, and it was tall. My brain, scrambling to make sense of it, put it at 6.5, maybe 7 feet. But the height wasn't the worst part. It was the proportions. It had these incredibly long, powerful arms that hung down past its knees. Its back was massive, just a huge slope of muscle and thick fur from its shoulders down to its waist. And it had no neck. I mean, it must have had one, biologically. But its head just seemed to sit directly on its shoulders, a heavy, conical shape that was darker than the rest of its body. I couldn't make out a face. Not from that distance, just a dark patch where a face should be. It turned its head and looked right at us. The feeling that went through me in that moment is impossible to describe. It wasn't just fear. It was this deep, primal coldness that started in my gut and shot out to my fingers and toes. It was the feeling of being looked at by something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that knew it wasn't supposed to exist. It didn't snarl. It didn't make a sound. It just looked. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, It held completely still, just staring at our truck as we rolled closer. The world had gone silent. The wind noise, the engine, my sister's voice. It all just vanished. There was only this thing and its gaze. Then it moved. It spun around, and I swear to God it moved like a professional athlete, not like a clumsy gorilla or a loping bear. It was fast and graceful and unbelievably powerful. It took 2-3 huge strides across the width of the road, its legs covering ground in a way that seemed impossible, and then it just launched itself off the shoulder and into the swamp. I say launched because it didn't just run into the trees, it leaped. It cleared the ditch and the first line of undergrowth in one bound, and then it was just gone. The foliage didn't shake and settle like it does when a deer or a person runs through it. It just swallowed it. 1 second it was there, a massive, impossible thing, and the next there was nothing but the same old swamp, quiet and still. The truck had rolled to a complete stop. My sister's hands were locked on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. I realized I was holding my breath, and I let it out in a shaky gasp. We just sat there, staring at the empty spot on the road where it had been. "What the hell was that?" my sister whispered. Her voice was thin and tight. I couldn't answer. My mind was a jumble of bear, man, monster. None of it fit. I looked at my sister and her face was pale, her eyes wide. She saw it too. It wasn't a trick of the light. We both saw the same impossible thing. We should go, I said, my own voice sounding strange and far away. She nodded, but she didn't put the truck in drive. She just kept staring ahead. "It was eating something," she said. I looked back at the road. Now that the thing was gone, I could see there was a dark, lumpy shape right where it had been hunched over. Roadkill, a possum or a raccoon, something like that. But it was torn apart. Guts and fur were strewn around in a messy circle. The sight of it made my stomach turn. That thing had been eating that animal right in the middle of the road. "We can't just sit here," I said, my fear starting to curdle into an urgent need to be anywhere else. My sister finally put the truck in gear, but instead of driving forward, she threw it into reverse. "We're going back," she said, her voice firm now. "We're not driving past that spot." She backed up until she found a wide spot in the shoulder, a place where loggers must have pulled in, and she executed a shaky 3-point turn. The whole time, my eyes were glued to the tree line. I was expecting to see it standing there, watching us from the shadows, but there was nothing, just the deepening gloom under the cypress trees. We started driving back the way we came, both of us silent. The mood in the cab had completely changed. The easy, boring drive was gone, replaced by a thick, heavy dread. Every shadow between the trees looked like a moving shape. Every stump looked like a crouching figure. About a mile back, we saw a small general store, the kind that sells live bait and boiled peanuts. My sister pulled in without a word. We both got out, our legs feeling a little weak. We needed to be around other people, to hear a human voice, to confirm that the normal world still existed. The screen door slammed behind us, and a little bell jingled. The store was dim and cool, smelling of old wood and fertilizer. An old man with a grizzled beard was behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at us, and I guess our faces said it all. "You two look like you've seen a ghost," he said, putting his paper down. My sister just blurted it out. "We saw something, on the road, back by the swamp bridge. An animal." The old man's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't look surprised. "Big fella, brown, stands up on 2 legs. A fresh chill went down my spine. He knew. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, that's it." He nodded slowly, like we'd just confirmed something he already knew. "You're not the first," he said. "Folks around here, we know about him. We don't talk about it much with outsiders. Don't want folks thinking we're crazy." He leaned forward on the counter. "We call him the Swamp Walker. Been stories about him in these parts for 50 years. My daddy saw him once, back in the 40s. He told us a few other stories, things he'd heard from other locals. A hunter who found footprints bigger than his own boot. A family who heard screaming from the swamp that didn't sound like any animal they knew. A farmer who found a calf dragged halfway into the woods, bitten clean in half. Every story made the cold knot in my stomach tighten. This wasn't a one-time fluke. This was a thing that lived here. This was its home. We bought 2 Cokes from him, our hands shaking so badly the bottles clinked together. We drank them outside, leaning against the hot metal of the truck, not saying anything. The normalcy of the buzzing flies and the heat felt like a lie. The world wasn't normal anymore. It had a crack in it, and we had seen what was on the other side. After a while, we got back in the truck. We couldn't stay there all night. Our friends were expecting us. But there was no way in hell we were going back down that stretch of highway. My sister pulled out a tattered road map from the glove compartment, and we found a long, looping detour that would add another 45 minutes to the trip, taking us way out of the way on county roads. We took it gladly. The rest of the drive was tense and quiet. We barely spoke. Every time we passed a dense patch of woods, my heart would jump into my throat. The image of that thing standing up, turning its head, was burned into the back of my eyelids. I couldn't stop thinking about the way it moved. That unnerving combination of raw power and fluid speed. It wasn't clumsy. It was a master of its environment. We finally got to our friend's house well after dark. We were both pale and quiet, and they immediately knew something was wrong. We told them the story, stumbling over our words, interrupting each other. They listened, their faces a mixture of skepticism and concern. They were good people, but you could tell they thought we'd maybe seen a weird bear, gotten spooked by the dark, and let our imaginations run wild. We didn't push it. What could we say? We knew what we saw. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was in their spare room, lying on a fold-out couch, staring at the ceiling. The window was open, and the sounds of the South Carolina night poured in. Crickets, frogs, the occasional distant dog bark. Normally, it was a comforting sound. That night, every chirp and croak felt like a mask for something else. Every rustle in the bushes outside was that thing coming back. I kept playing it over and over in my head, the way it stood up, the sheer bulk of it, the complete absence of any sound it made. It was so quiet, a bear would have huffed, snarled, something. This thing was silent, dead silent. The most chilling part, the part that still gets me, was the look. It didn't look at us like we were a threat. It didn't look at us like we were prey. It was a look of assessment, of simple, pure awareness. It saw us, registered us, and then decided we weren't worth its time. It had more important things to do, like disappearing back into the swamp it owned. We cut our visit short and left the next morning. Driving back in the bright, clear light of day, we took the main highway again. As we approached the swamp bridge, my sister slowed down. We both stared at the spot. There was nothing there, no sign, no mark, no torn-up roadkill. It was just a stretch of asphalt like any other, with the swamps stretching out on either side, green and placid and impenetrable. But we knew what was in there. We had seen the resident. I've never gone back to that part of Oakland County. My sister moved out of state a few years later. We don't talk about it much, but when we do, on the rare occasion, we don't have to describe it to each other. We just look at each other, and the same cold understanding passes between us. We know what we saw. We know it was real. And we know that somewhere, in those deep, dark South Carolina swamps, it's still out there, still moving through the trees with that impossible, silent grace. Just a fact of the land, a secret the locals keep, waiting for the next car to come around the bend at the wrong time of day. Story 16. It was one of those stupid ideas that sounds great when you're sitting around bored. Me and my buddy, let's just call him my buddy, because even now, thinking about his name feels weird, like I'd be dragging him back into it. We decided to take his little aluminum boat out from Scott's Landing. You know the place. if you're from around here. It's just a dirt ramp off the road in what everyone calls Nassau County, Florida, right where the St. Mary's River starts to wiggle its way up into Georgia. The plan was simple, just a lazy day on the water. He had this old outboard motor, a sputtering piece of junk that he swore was reliable. We had a cooler with some beers and sandwiches, and that was it. No fancy gear, no GPS, just a couple of guys trying to kill a Saturday. The river was brown and slow, the way it always is, the trees on both banks leaning over like they were tired. It was hot, the kind of wet, thick Florida heat that makes your shirt stick to your back 5 minutes after you put it on. We puttered along for hours, just talking trash and watching the world go by. We saw a few gators sunning themselves on the banks, but they just slid into the water as we passed. Nothing unusual. That's the thing about that river. It feels ancient. It doesn't care about you. The Spanish moss hangs down like ragged curtains, and sometimes you round a bend and you feel like you're the first person to ever see that particular spot. The motor coughed itself to death a little after 6 in the evening. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It just gave a final, sad little sputter and went silent. The sudden quiet was heavy. My buddy yanked on the starter cord until he was red in the face and sweating bullets, but it wasn't happening. The sun was starting to dip down, painting the sky in oranges and purples, but all I could think was that we were stuck. We weren't complete idiots. We had paddles, so we started paddling, but the current was lazy and we were fighting it, trying to get back the way we came. It was useless. After maybe an hour of that, our arms burning, we saw a spot on the Florida side, a little clearing with a rickety wooden dock. It led up to what looked like an old fishing camp. The place was empty, totally dark. It had that abandoned feel, like no one had been there in years. The screen door on the single-room shack was hanging off one hinge. Better than nothing, my buddy said, and I agreed. We tied the boat to the dock and went up to check it out. The shack was unlocked. Inside, it was just one room with a dusty wooden floor, a rusty cot in one corner, and a table with 2 chairs. It smelled like mildew and old wood. We decided to just wait there until first light. Maybe we could flag down another boater, or the motor would magically decide to work again in the morning. We ate our soggy sandwiches and split the last warm beer. We didn't talk much. The silence of the place was getting to us. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was a waiting silence. It got fully dark, the kind of dark you only get way out on the river, where the only light comes from the moon and the stars reflecting off the water. We were just sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, trying to doze off. I must have drifted in and out, because the next thing I knew, a sound snapped me wide awake. It was past midnight. I know because I fumbled for my phone and the screen blazed to life. 12:34. The sound was a crack, not a little twig snap. This was a crack, like a thick branch, the kind as big as your leg, just getting snapped in half. It came from directly across the river. We both froze, just listening. The swamp at night is never quiet. There are frogs, insects, the occasional splash. But this was different. This was a punctuation mark in the middle of all that background noise. Then we heard the movement. It was heavy. You could hear the weight of it. It wasn't a deer. I've heard deer. This was slower, more deliberate. Each step sounded like someone was dropping a heavy sack of gravel onto the ground. Thump, crunch, thump. My buddy looked at me, his eyes wide. He shook his head. A tiny, frantic movement. Don't! But I had to. The not knowing was worse. I had a big metal flashlight, one of those heavy-duty ones. I got up slowly, my joints feeling stiff and loud. I crept to the door and looked out through the torn screen. The moon was out so I could see the river, a ribbon of silver, and the black wall of trees on the other side. The sounds were still coming. Thump, crunch. And then a new sound. A low, deep grunt. It wasn't a pig. It wasn't a bear. I've heard both. This was deeper, guttural, like it was coming from a barrel chest. It was a sound of pure power. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. I unlocked the flashlight, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I took a deep breath, stepped out onto the little porch, and pointed the beam across the river. The light cut through the darkness, sweeping over cypress knees and tangled undergrowth. For a second I saw nothing. Then the beam hit something. It was a shoulder, a massive, dark, rounded shoulder, just visible between two trees. It was covered in what looked like wet, dark hair. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing, just the part I could see, looked like it belonged to something that could have looked me in the eye without even straightening up. I moved the beam up slowly, and that's when I saw the head. It was turned partly away, but I saw the profile, a heavy, ridged brow, and then, as the light hit its face, it turned. The eyes. Oh God, the eyes. They weren't reflecting the light like an animal's would. They glowed, a solid, hellish red, like two burning coals shoved into its skull. There was no white, no pupil, just 2 points of fierce, intelligent red light locked directly onto me. Time stopped. My blood went cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was just staring into those 2 red suns from across 50 yards of black water. The thing didn't look away. It let out a roar that wasn't a roar. It was a roar mixed with a growl, a sound of pure, unbridled fury that vibrated right through my bones. I felt it in my teeth. It was the angriest sound I have ever heard in my life. It was the sound of being seen, of being challenged. It took a step forward, out from behind the trees, and I saw more of it. It was immense, built like a power lifter, covered in that same dark, shaggy hair. It raised one of its arms, and it was long, too long, and it slammed a fist against the trunk of a tree. The whole tree shook. The sound was like a gunshot. Then it started stomping. Back and forth along the bank, just on the other side. Pacing, every stomp was a heavy, wet thud, and the whole time it was making this low, rumbling growl, a continuous stream of anger that was meant for me. It would stop, turn those red eyes back on me, and let out another one of those bone-shaking roars. I was still shining the light on it, frozen. I think I was too terrified to turn it off. My buddy was still in the shack. I could hear him whispering, "What is it? What is it?" But his voice was thin and reedy, lost under the noise from across the river. I couldn't have answered him if I tried. My throat was sealed shut. This went on and on. It felt like an eternity. I'd glance at my phone, and only 5 minutes had passed, then 10. The creature didn't let up. It was a display, a show of dominance. It was telling me I was in its place, and I was not welcome. The smell hit me then, carried across the water on a slight breeze. It was a foul, musky stench, like rotten meat and wet dog and something else, something sour and wild that I can't even describe. It made my eyes water. After what had to be over an hour, the growling just stopped. In the middle of a roar, it just cut off. The stomping stopped. The red eyes, which had been fixed on me, suddenly turned away, and the creature just melted back into the trees. It moved with a surprising, unsettling silence for something so huge. 1 second it was there, the next the darkness had swallowed it. The silence that followed was somehow louder and more terrifying than the noise had been. My ears were ringing. I could finally lower the flashlight. My arm ached from holding it up for so long. I stood there on the porch, shaking uncontrollably, just staring at the spot where it had been. I expected it to come back. I expected it to come across the river. It didn't. I finally stumbled back into the shack. My buddy was curled into a ball in the corner, his face white as a sheet. He looked at me and I just shook my head. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say. We sat there, back to back for warmth or comfort, or just to feel another human being, and waited for the sun. Every tiny sound from outside, a frog, an owl, the creak of the old building, made us jump. We were wound so tight I thought we might break. The night dragged on, minute by agonizing minute. When the first hint of grey started to lighten the sky, it was the most beautiful and relieving thing I had ever seen. As soon as it was light enough to see the river clearly, we ran for the boat. We didn't even think about the motor. We grabbed the paddles and started rowing downstream, like our lives depended on it. Our muscles screamed. But we didn't stop. We just paddled, frantically, desperate to put as much distance between us and that camp as possible. We must have rowed for a solid hour before we saw another boat. It was a police patrol boat, just putting along. We waved our arms like madmen. They came over, and 2 officers looked down at us. We must have been a sight. Pale, wide-eyed, drenched in sweat. We started talking over each other, trying to explain about the motor, about the camp, about the thing. We probably sounded insane. The one officer, an older guy with a tired face, just listened. He didn't laugh. He didn't tell us we were crazy. He just nodded slowly and said, "The St. Mary's has its secrets. We'll tow you back to Scott's." They tied a line to our bow and pulled us. The ride back was quiet. Me and my buddy just sat in our boat being towed, not looking at each other, not looking at the Georgia bank, just staring at the bottom of the boat. They dropped us off at the landing. We loaded the boat onto the trailer, still in silence. When we got in the truck, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Its eyes," he said. They were red. I just nodded. We drove back to my place. He dropped me off, and we haven't really talked about it since, not in any real way. What is there to say? I still go out on the water sometimes, but I never ever go back to that part of the St. Mary's. And I never ever go out after dark. Every time I'm in the woods and I hear a branch snap, my heart leaps into my throat. I see those red eyes in my dreams. I feel that growl in my bones. It was there. It saw me, and I have no way to explain what it was, or why it was so angry, or what it would have done if we hadn't been on the other side of that river. I just know that it was real, and I haven't felt truly safe in the dark since... Story 17. Okay, so this happened back in September of 1998. I was stationed at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina, but I lived off base in Horry County because it was cheaper and quieter. Better for raising my boys. I'm a single dad, have been since my wife passed a couple years before, and at the time, my 2 sons were just little, maybe 4 and 6 years old. They're both grown now, but back then, life was all about juggling duty and dad stuff. That day, I'd picked them up from a friend's house after my shift ended. It was one of those late afternoons where the heat just hangs in the air, thick and heavy, and the sun starts to dip, casting long shadows that make everything feel a bit off. I remember the sky was this weird orange-purple mix, like a bruise, and the humidity was so bad my shirt was sticking to the seat. We were driving down this back road, Route 501, I think. It's mostly 2 lanes out there, surrounded by pine woods and patches of swampy ditches. Not many houses around, just the occasional trailer or farmhouse set way back from the road. The boys were zonked out in the back seat, buckled into their car seats, their heads lolling against the windows. I could hear their soft breathing over the hum of the engine, and the radio was playing some country station low, just to fill the silence. I was tired, man, bone tired from a long day, and my mind was drifting to what I needed to do when we got home. Make dinner, get the kids bathed, all that. The road was pretty empty, just me and a few other cars now and then. So I was cruising at a steady pace, not speeding, but not slow either. Then I saw something in the ditch up ahead, on the right side. At first, I thought it was a dog. Maybe a big one, like a German shepherd or something, curled up or lying weird. It was kind of hunched over, and the fur looked matted, dark against the muddy bank. My first instinct was to slow down a bit, just in case it was hurt or might dart into the road. You know how it is out in the country. Animals get hit all the time, and I didn't want that on my conscience. So I eased off the gas, and as I got closer, maybe 50 feet away, I could see it more clearly. It was bigger than I'd thought, and the shape was wrong for a dog. The body was bulky, almost like a bear's, but lankier, and it had this orange-brown fur that looked dirty, like it had been rolling in mud. I remember my heart starting to thump a little harder, not out of fear yet, just curiosity. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The thing was facing away from me, so all I could see was its back and what looked like long arms tucked under it. The ditch was shallow there, filled with weeds and stagnant water from recent rains, and the smell of damp earth and decay wafted in through the vents when I'd cracked the window earlier. I slowed the car to almost a crawl, maybe 10 miles an hour, just to get a better look. Part of me was thinking, is that a person? No, it can't be, but it was too big and moved in a way that wasn't human. Then, as I got within maybe 30 feet, it turned its head, not slowly, like an animal might, but in this quick, jerky motion. And that's when I saw its face. Oh God, I'll never forget that face. It wasn't a dog's face. It was like something out of a nightmare, but not in a cartoon way. It looked almost like an orangutan, but with no fur on its face, just pale, wrinkled skin. The head was wide, too wide for its body, and it had scraggly dark hair sticking out in patches around the top and sides. Its eyes were deep-set and dark, and they fixed right on me. No expression, just this blank, intense stare. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. The radio seemed to fade into static in my head. I was still moving slowly, but my foot hovered over the brake, ready to stop if I had to. Then it started to move. It used its arms, long, sinewy arms with fingers that were curved almost like claws, to push itself up out of the ditch. The motion wasn't graceful. It was awkward, powerful, like it was heaving its weight up. I could see the muscles straining under that orange-brown fur, and the fur itself was patchy in places, showing glimpses of that same pale skin underneath. As it rose, it kept its eyes locked on me, and I swear I felt this primal fear kick in, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your hands shake. It wasn't just scary, it was wrong, like it shouldn't exist. In that moment, everything snapped into focus. The boys were still asleep, thank God, but I could hear one of them stir a little, mumbling in his sleep. I didn't want them to wake up and see this. My mind raced. What the hell is that? Bigfoot? Some kind of ape? But we're in South Carolina, not the jungle. I'd heard stories from other guys in the service about weird sightings in the woods, but I always brushed them off as tall tales. Now, faced with this thing, it all felt too real. It was standing now, fully upright, and it was tall, maybe 7 feet or more, with a hunched posture that made it look even more imposing. Its arms hung low, almost to its knees, and those curved fingers twitched slightly. It didn't make a sound, no growl or anything, just stood there staring. I didn't think, I just acted. My foot slammed on the gas and the car lurched forward. The engine roared, and I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't look back, not at first. I just focused on the road ahead, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me, making my vision sharpen and my hands tremble. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of it still standing there, watching me go, but I forced myself not to stare. The trees whizzed by and the car felt like it was flying, though I doubt I was going more than 60 on that narrow road. After a minute or so, when I was sure I was far enough away, I risked a glance in the mirror again. Nothing, just the empty road behind me fading into the dusk. I kept driving, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The boys were still asleep, oblivious, and I was grateful for that. I didn't want to scare them, and I didn't know how I'd explain it if they woke up. My mind was reeling. What was that thing? Was it dangerous? Should I report it? But to who? The police would think I was crazy, especially with no proof. I thought about pulling over to collect myself, but I was too spooked. Every shadow in the woods lining the road seemed to move, and every sound, the wind rustling the pines, the tires on the asphalt, felt amplified, threatening. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, my eyes constantly scanning the sides of the road. The whole time that image was burned into my brain. That orangutan-like face, the wide head, the scraggly hair, the way it pushed itself up with those long arms. It wasn't just the look of it, it was the feeling it gave me. This deep, gut-wrenching fear that I'd stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see, like I'd crossed some line into a world that wasn't meant for people. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house was dark, and I sat there for a minute, just listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. My hands were still shaking, and I had to take a few deep breaths to steady myself before I unbuckled and got the boys out. They woke up groggy, asking if we were home, and I forced a smile, telling them everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. That night, after I put them to bed, I stayed up, staring out the window into the dark. Every little noise made me jump. A branch tapping against the house, the fridge humming. I kept replaying the encounter in my head over and over, the way it turned, the lack of sound, the sheer size of it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of deformity, or an escaped animal from a zoo. But bears don't have faces like that, and there weren't any zoos around that kept orangutans. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made, and that's what got to me, the not knowing. The feeling that I'd seen something that defied explanation. In the days that followed, I thought about going back to that spot, just to see if there were any signs, tracks, fur, anything. But I never did. Part of me was too scared, and part of me didn't want to know. What if it was still there? What if it wasn't alone? I told a couple of buddies from the base about it, and they laughed it off, said I must have been tired or seen a trick of the light. But I know what I saw. It was real, and it happened in broad daylight on a road I'd driven 100 times before. That image, that peculiar, menacing form, has stuck with me ever since. Even now, years later, I'll be driving somewhere remote, and I'll get that same chill, that same sense of being watched. I never saw it again, and I'm glad for that, but it left a mark on me, a deep, unsettled feeling that I can't shake, like I glimpsed something that wasn't meant for this world, and it's still out there, waiting. Story 18. It was a Thursday, I remember, because we'd just finished up some fence repairs earlier that day and were all kind of tired, but we had to do the nightly patrol. The moon was almost full, so it wasn't pitch black out there. You could see shadows and shapes pretty clearly, which usually made things easier. We were in the ranch truck, an old beat-up Ford that had seen better days, but it got the job done. I was driving. One guy was in the passenger seat, and the other was in the back, just keeping watch. The air was cool, but not cold, with that damp, earthy smell you get in the spring, mixed with the scent of cattle and dust. We started the patrol around 9 in the evening, driving along the perimeter fences. At first, everything seemed normal. The cattle were usually calm at night, just lying down or grazing slowly. But after about an hour, I noticed they were getting restless. They weren't settling. Instead, they were moving around in tight circles, lowing softly, and their heads were up, ears twitching like they were listening to something. I'd seen them spooked by coyotes or even a stray dog before, but this felt different. It was like a tension building in the air, thick and heavy. I slowed the truck down and rolled down my window to listen. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps, like something big was walking on 2 legs. Not the light, quick steps of a deer or the shuffling of a cow, but deep, thudding sounds that seemed to vibrate through the ground. I could feel it in the seat of the truck, a low rumble that made my stomach clench. The other guys heard it too. The one in the passenger seat leaned forward, his eyes wide, and whispered, "What the hell is that?" We didn't say much after that, just kept listening. The footsteps were getting closer, and then we heard this deep, guttural bellow. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. Not a bear, not a cougar. It was lower, more primal, and it echoed through the trees, making the hair on my arms stand up. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I flipped on the spotlights we had mounted on the truck, sweeping them across the field. That's when we saw them. 2 enormous creatures, standing upright like humans but way bigger. One was dark-haired, almost black, and the other was lighter, maybe a reddish brown. They were chasing the cattle, moving with these powerful, coordinated strides that covered ground fast. I'd guess they were over 7 feet tall, maybe even 8, and their bodies were thick and muscular. The way they moved wasn't clumsy. It was smooth, almost graceful, but terrifying because of the sheer force behind it. The cattle were panicking, running in all directions, and the creatures were herding them like they knew what they were doing. I felt this cold dread wash over me. We'd all heard stories about Bigfoot or whatever, but I never believed any of it until that moment. This was real, right in front of us. The spotlights caught their eyes and they glowed this amber-red color like hot coals. It sent a chill down my spine, and I could hear the guy in the back seat breathing fast, almost hyperventilating. Then the darker one turned and looked right at us. It stopped chasing the cattle and started moving toward the truck. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I felt frozen, like I couldn't look away. The roar it let out was deafening, a deep sound that I didn't just hear. I felt it in my chest, like a physical vibration that made my ribs shake. My whole body went rigid with fear. I could smell my own sweat, sharp and sour, and the air felt thick, hard to breathe. It took a few steps closer, and then it grabbed a fence post, a thick wooden one that had been there for years, and snapped it like it was a twig. The sound was sharp, a crack that cut through the night, and I saw the wood splintering. That's when something in me broke. I slammed my foot on the gas, not even thinking, just reacting. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning in the dirt, and we took off down the path. I didn't look back, not at first. I just drove, my hands shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel straight. The other guys were yelling, but I couldn't make out the words. It was all a blur of panic. We raced back toward the ranch house, the headlights bouncing over the rough terrain, and every shadow felt like it was moving. I kept expecting to see those amber-red eyes in the rear-view mirror, but there was nothing, just darkness. We didn't stop until we were inside the gate, and even then we sat in the truck for a few minutes, just trying to catch our breath. No one spoke. We were all pale, sweating, and I could feel my legs trembling. Eventually we went inside and locked the doors, but none of us slept that night. We just sat in the living room listening to every creak and rustle, jumping at any little noise. At first light we decided to go back out there. We had to see what was left, and honestly, I think we needed to prove to ourselves that it really happened. The sun was just coming up, casting a soft glow over the fields, and everything looked peaceful. But as we drove closer to where we'd been, the damage became clear. We found large tracks in the mud, over 17 inches long, with deep impressions that showed the weight of whatever made them. They weren't like bear tracks. These were more human-like, but huge, with 5 toes and an arch. We followed them for a bit, and they led into the forest, where we saw broken trees, saplings snapped in half, and bigger branches torn down. The fence where the creature had grabbed the post was bent and splintered, the metal wires twisted out of shape. Standing there, looking at all that, I felt this deep, sinking feeling. It wasn't just the size or the strength that got to me, it was the intelligence, the way they moved together, herding the cattle, and how one of them targeted us. It felt calculated, like they knew what they were doing. We took some photos, but we never reported it to anyone official. Who would believe us? We just packed up and decided right then that we wouldn't do any more nighttime patrols. Not after that. Even now, years later, I still think about it. Sometimes I'll be out in the woods during the day, and I'll get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I'm being watched. I never saw them again, and I don't want to. That one night was enough to change how I see the world. I don't have any answers, just this memory that haunts me and the knowledge that there are things out there that we don't understand. Story 19. It was August of 2009, and I swear, even now, just thinking about that month makes my skin feel clammy. It was the kind of hot that doesn't just sit on your skin. It gets inside you, makes your lungs feel heavy and your thoughts slow. My buddy and I, we'd been fishing this particular spot on the bayou in northern Louisiana since we were teenagers. It was our spot, quiet, dark, far enough from any road that you couldn't hear a car, just the frogs and the bugs and the occasional splash of a gator or a big gar. That night, we'd gotten out there around 8, just as the last of the daylight was giving up. We had a cooler of cheap beer, our rods, and a big white bucket full of live bait, crawfish and some shiners. We were just existing, not talking much, just casting out, reeling in, the occasional crack of a beer can opening, the kind of comfortable silence you only get with someone you've known forever. It must have been around 10:30 at night when things started to feel off. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment, but it was like the background noise of the swamp just dropped. The frogs, they're usually a constant deafening choir, they just stopped. Not all at once, but in a wave, like something was moving through and they were shutting up as it passed. I remember feeling a chill, which was insane, because the air was so thick and warm you could drink it. I looked over at my friend and he was just staring out at the water, his line slack. He felt it too. We didn't say anything. You don't in moments like that. You just get quiet and listen. The water in front of us was black, like oil. The moon was out, but it was a thin sliver, not giving much light. Then I saw the ripples, not from a fish. A fish makes a little concentric circle. These were different. They were big, lazy swells, like something huge was moving just under the surface, parallel to the dock. My friend nudged me and pointed with his chin. We both watched, our beers forgotten in our hands. Then the water about 15 feet out just bulged and an arm came out. It's been over a decade and I can still see it in perfect detail. It was covered in wet, dark hair, matted down like an otter's fur. It was thick, man, thicker than my thigh. It rose up slow and this hand, this gigantic hand, gripped the edge of our wooden dock. The wood groaned under the weight. The hand was twice the size of any man's hand I'd ever seen. The fingers were long and powerful, and I remember seeing dirt or mud caked under the nails, which were dark and thick, more like claws. My brain was screaming, trying to find a box to put this in. A bear! There are no bears that big around here. A person in a suit. Don't be stupid. This was real. This was flesh and blood, and it was right there. The arm tensed, and the rest of it came up. It unfolded from the water, and I mean unfolded, like it was uncoiling itself. It was massive, over 8 feet tall, easy. Its chest was barrel-wide and covered in the same dark, dripping hair, but I could see muscles moving under it. It was caked in mud and slime from the bayou bottom. The smell hit us then, a foul, earthy odor like rotten eggs and wet dog and deep, wet soil. It was a physical thing, that smell. It coated the back of my throat. But the worst part was its face. I don't even know if you can call it a face. It was mostly a heavy brow ridge, shadowing everything beneath. But in that shadow, 2 points of deep glowing red appeared. They weren't reflecting light. They were making their own, a dull, angry red, like hot coals. It wasn't looking around, it was looking right at us. It was so quiet. The only sound was the water dripping from its body and this low, wet huffing sound coming from it. It moved its head, just a slight tilt, and those red eyes scanned us up and down. It felt intelligent. This wasn't some dumb animal. It was assessing us. It knew what we were. It turned its head slowly toward our bait bucket, which was sitting between us on the dock, in one fluid motion. Its other arm came up, and it grabbed the bucket. Its fingers wrapped all the way around it. The plastic creaked. It lifted the bucket, brought it up to its face, and sniffed it. I heard the wet inhalation, a loud huff that stirred the air. It was smelling our crawfish. Then it slowly lowered the bucket, and its eyes locked with mine. That was the moment. That was the terror moment. Everything else was just shock and disbelief. But when it locked eyes with me, I felt a coldness sink right into the center of my bones. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My friend was frozen solid next to me, a statue. Those red eyes. They weren't just eyes, they were ancient. They held a knowledge of this swamp, of this darkness, that I could never comprehend. It knew we were intruders, it knew we were scared, and it was curious. It took a step forward, one heavy, squelching footfall on the muddy bank. The sound was horribly solid. It wasn't a ghost, it was a ton of muscle and bone, and it was now between us and the path back to the truck. My brain short-circuited. Every instinct was screaming, run, but my legs were jelly. My friend made a tiny, strangled sound in his throat. The creature's chest rumbled, a low growl that I felt in my teeth more than I heard. It was still holding the bait bucket, and it tilted its head again, those red eyes never leaving us. We started backing up. It was the slowest, most careful movement I have ever made in my life. We didn't turn our backs, we just shuffled backwards. One tiny, trembling step at a time, our eyes glued to it. I was waiting for it to lunge. I was waiting to feel those huge hands on me. It watched us for what felt like an hour. It just stood there, breathing that low, wet breath, its intelligent gaze pinning us in place. Then, as if it had decided we weren't worth the trouble, it made a dismissive sound, a kind of grunting sniff. It dropped the bait bucket on the dock with a loud plastic clatter. Then, in one surprisingly graceful motion, it just leaned back and fell into the black water. The splash was enormous. A wave of that foul-smelling water washed over the dock, soaking our shoes. And then, silence. It was gone. The frogs didn't start up again. The bugs were still silent. It was just us, standing there in the deafening quiet, shivering in the hot August night. We didn't speak. We didn't look at each other. We just turned and ran. We crashed through the undergrowth, branches whipping our faces, not caring about the noise. We hit the old dirt road and sprinted for the truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the lock. We scrambled inside, locked the doors, and my friend just yelled, "Go! Just go!" I peeled out, the tires spinning in the gravel, and we didn't stop until we were back on the main highway, the lights of the nearest town glowing in the distance. We pulled into a 24-hour gas station and just sat there, the engine running, neither of us saying a word. I could still smell it on my clothes, that earthy, rotten smell. We couldn't just leave it. We had to know. As soon as the sun started to come up, turning the sky a pale grey, we drove back. We parked a good distance away and walked in, our footsteps loud in the morning quiet. The swamp sounds were back. Birds, frogs, the whole orchestra. It felt normal. It felt wrong that it could feel so normal. We got to the dock. The place was a wreck. Our fishing rods were smashed, just splintered pieces of fiberglass. The cooler was on its side, the lid torn off, and the bait bucket. It wasn't just dropped, it was crushed. The white plastic was flattened, like something huge had stomped on it. There were crawfish and shiners scattered everywhere, already being picked at by ants. But that wasn't the worst of it. In the soft, wet mud at the edge of the bank, there were footprints. They were huge, I mean massive. I put my own boot next to one. My size 11 boot looked like a child's toy. The prints were easily 18, 20 inches long. They were deep, showing the immense weight of whatever made them. And the toes, they were long, and there was a weird, indistinct quality to them, like the foot was flexible in a way a human foot isn't. And on the wooden plank of the dock, right where its hand had gripped, there was a handprint. The wood was slightly splintered from the pressure. The print was clear, 5 long fingers, a massive palm. I took a tape measure from my truck's toolbox. The hand, from the heel of the palm to the tip of the middle finger, was 10 inches long. 10 inches. We called the local sheriff's office. A single deputy came out maybe an hour later. He was an older guy, looked tired. He walked around, looked at the prints, looked at the smashed gear. He took a few notes. I was babbling, trying to tell him about the arm, the red eyes, the size of it. He just listened, nodding slowly. When I was done, he closed his notebook. He looked out at the bayou, then back at us. "You boys see a lot of gators out here?" he asked. We just stared at him. Gators? A gator didn't do this. A gator doesn't have 10-inch hands and stand 8 feet tall. He shrugged. Big fella, maybe, or a bear passing through. We get 'em sometimes. He knew that was a lie. We knew he knew. But what was he going to write in his report? Possible Sasquatch encounter. He just tipped his hat. I'd find a new fishing spot if I were you. We never went back to that spot. Not ever. We tried fishing other parts of the bayou a few times, but it was never the same. Every ripple in the water made my heart jump. Every rustle in the bushes froze me solid. I sold my boat a year later. I just couldn't do it anymore. What haunts me, what really keeps me up some nights, isn't just the size of it or the red eyes. It's the intelligence. It was watching us. It had been under the water, listening to us talk and laugh, for who knows how long before it decided to show itself. It was curious. It wanted to see what we were, what we had. It moved with a purpose that was beyond any animal I've ever seen. That thing lives out there. It's in those dark, silent waters. It knows the swamps better than we ever will. And it showed itself to us for a reason I'll never understand. It changed everything. I don't see the bayou as a peaceful place anymore. I see it as a place where things like that can hide, just a few feet away, and you'd never know they were there until they decide to let you know.